Hello everyone, and welcome to the Fictional Vortex. So we are back with an interesting movie on what if Naruto was the Senju of the first Mokuton. But before we start, I just want to remind you to please subscribe to my channel and hit the like button if you enjoy my content. Let's start the story. Konohagakure, the village hidden in the leaf. A village that is renowned for the many great bloodlines that hail from it. The Byakugan of the Hyuga clan, which allows its user to see the chakra coils of their fellow shinobi, and using a taijutsu significant O.N.L.Y. to their clan called Jukin, they can seal off chakra points in the coils, stopping the natural flow of chakra. Then we have the renowned Sharingan of the Uchiha clan. The Sharingan, which allows its user to read the flow of chakra to a lesser extent of the Byakugan and grants its user great perception. The most renowned ability of the Sharingan is the fact that it could analyze and copy any non-bloodline jutsu. There is even a rumor that the Sharingan has the ability to grant its user immortality, but this is uncertain. The most renowned and sought-after bloodline was never a bloodline to begin with. The Mokuton, or wood release. Only one man was known for his ability to use Mokuton, and that man was the Shodai Hokage, Hashirama Senju. Hashirama was the first man dubbed leader of Konohagakure, or the first fire shadow. Despite having built the village with his longtime rival, Madara Uchiha. It was because of this that Madara left the village, and later returned with the Kyuubi no Kitsune to destroy the village. Hashirama stopped him, sealing the Kyuubi away within his wife with the use of his Mokuton. The village was saved and Madara's plan was foiled. For now, anyway. When it was announced that Hashirama had another son, the people were overjoyed. They expected a new batch of Mokuton users to help lead their people. Unfortunately, this was not meant to be. As time went on and Hashirama aged, the hopes for a new Mokuton user died out. Even when Tsunade Senju was born, the people, although happy for a new heir to the famed Senju clan, did not expect her to have the renowned Mokuton. She didn't. As time went on, the peace between the several villages started to end, and soon the world was engulfed in the First Shinobi World War. The many villages of the elemental nations participated, each one wanting to prove their strength and that their way was the only way for shinobi to live, but in the end it only stopped when all villages were nearly destroyed. Konohagakure was possibly the most affected, for they lost not only Hashirama, but his brother, Tobirama, who Hashirama named Nadaime Hokage before he died. After both of their death, Hiruzen Sarutobi was named Sandaime Hokage. Everyone had thought the Mokuton bloodline had been lost, and all was calm until the Second Shinobi World War. This war brought many deaths, but many heroes for Konoha. It was in Th. Is war that Tsunade Senju made her name as a world-renowned medic nin and one of the three Sannin alongside her two teammates and friends Jiraiya and Orochimaru. Another hero was Konoha's White Fang, Tsukumo Hatake. But his is a story for a later time. While villages burned and shinobi died, people wished for their Hokage to have some secret technique, much similar to the one of the Shodai Hokage. Alas, there was none. It was during this that the trees, the woods of Konoha, more specifically, the legendary Forest of Death, started to become self-aware. Despite Hashirama's death, he lived on through his legendary forest, and still kept watch over the village. After the Third Shinobi War, the Silent Forest had had enough. It only became even more enraged after the Kyuubi attack. When it was announced to the village by Sarutobi that the Yondaime had left behind a savior, a Jinchuriki of the Kyuubi no Kitsune, the cries of anger and hatred drove the forest to recede from the village's outskirts. The Forest of Death being the only part of the wood to stay near the village. These angry cries for blood upset the forest, and it swore that the villagers would be taught a lesson, if not for the forest's safety, but for the villagers, as well. The will of fire burned in these woods, and they sensed the will in the Jinchuriki. 5 years later, the Forest of Death rested in peace. Then the cries of hatred came again, and anger roused in the forest. "Get back here, demon!" a villager shouted. A young blonde ran into the Forest of Death, ignoring the sign and fleeing into the wood. The villagers hesitated before one took a step forward. A shinobi with long silver hair grabbed the villager's shoulder. "He's as good as dead," the shinobi said. "Barely any Jonin makes it through there alive." The forest blew in a non-existent wind in an effort to show its amusement. The villagers and shinobi left, crying in joy of the death of the demon. The forest's attention turned to the young blonde that ran into the forest. The child was crying and hugging his legs as he rested against a tree. The forest realized he couldn't be older than 6 and felt immediate hatred for the villagers. They were nothing but bad excuses for humans. Why do they hate me? He sobbed out. I didn't do nothing to them. And now I don't know where I am. The forest took pity on the boy. It could sense his anger and frustration rising. The forest grew upset that Sarutobi had allowed an innocent child, one who bears the will of fire no less, be treated like wild animal. No, even animals were treated better than this human. A spark of Hashirama's spirit that rested in the forest awoke then, and it decided to make a change. The tree the boy was leaning against suddenly sprouted 2 branches covered in fur-like leaves. The branches wrapped around the boy and the blonde gasped at the warmth. He opened his eyes to see that the tree was hugging him. He blinked in surprise before looking up at the tree. The tree. He asked no one. In response, the tree hugged him tighter. He turned to hug the tree back as his tears dried up. Thank you, he whispered. Another branch similar to the 2 hugging I.M. sprouted above the blonde's head and brushed his hair from his face. Naruto looked up and hesitated before asking. Do you understand me? He asked. The limb stopped brushing his hair and carved into the bark out a few sentences. Wow, he muttered in amazement as he read them before he looked back up at the tree. So you're like Shodai-sama's legacy, right? More carving started and the blonde read it aloud. Yes, little fern. I'm not. Oh, a nickname. Cool. Yes, it is cool, kind of. If you want to be safe, you can stay here. If you choose to do so, I will give you a gift to defend yourself with. Wow, really? When the tree carved out. Yes, the blonde smiled and hugged the tree tighter. Thank you, but what do I call you? I mean, you can call me Naruto if you want. The tree's RK seemed to regenerate before it carved into it once again. Naruto smiled at the tree and hugged it even tighter than before. Thank you, Ka-san, he said, earning another brushing of his hair. The next morning, Naruto awoke in the branches the trees grew in order to protect him from the creatures that fed during the night. He stretched and yawned before looking around and regaining his bearings. He smiled as a branch wrapped around his shoulders and leaned into the tree. Good morning, Ka-san, the boy said with a giggle. It's kind of weird talking to trees like this. What was that thing that I have to do? He looked to see the tree using another branch to carve into its bark again. He frowned and looked at his hands. If that's what I have to do, Ka-san, the boy said. He held his hands out while closing his eyes and biting his lip. 2 sharp branches came out from the tree and slowly cut along his hands while leaves from the tree dripped some dew into the cuts. Steam emitted from his hands while the cuts healed slowly. Naruto let tears roll down his cheeks as the dew dripped into his hands, but a reassuring squeeze from the branch around his shoulders helped. Then heard a voice. A motherly feminine voice that had him looking around. Eventually, Naruto looked back at the tree in awe. I can hear you, Ka-san, the blonde said with wide eyes. A smile emerged on his face as he hugged the tree again. For the rest of the day, the forest explained to Naruto just what it did for him. It had mutated his genes to allow him to use Mokuton, or would release, and understand what it was saying. The memories of Hashirama Senju as well as the forest's knowledge embedded themselves in the blonde. The forest explained now that it was his duty as a Mokusei to defend the woods of Konohagakure and the creatures that reside within it. I accept this duty, Ka-san, Naruto said with determination as the whisker marks on his face left and a green glow appeared on his body. He hugged the tree once again and continued. I will become the strongest Mokuton user since Hashirama-sama, and defend my Ka-san with my life. 1 year later. Damn you, Mizuki, a Chunin with a scar across his face shouted. Why did this now? Why? The long silver-haired Chunin he was chasing smirked and looked back at his friend. Mizuki called over his shoulder, it's simple, Uruka. This village is weak. Only Lord Orochimaru is worthy of having this knowledge. Not some dumbass old fool that believes in a will of fire. With this, Orochimaru-sama, holy shit. While he wasn't looking where he was going, a wall trees shot up from the ground, cutting off his path of escape. The silver-haired Chunin gasped and stopped on a tree branch before turning around to face the 2 Tokubetsu Jonin and Chunin that were chasing him. One was a girl that had purple hair done up in a ponytail that made it look like a purple flame or something similar. She was wearing a brown trench coat and orange skirt. Her fishnet clothes and her Konoha headband was wrapped around her neck. The other Tokubetsu was wielding a sword in defensive hold and wearing standard Konoha shinobi attire. His head ite was due. Nay in a bandana style that covered most of his hair. The last was the scarred Chunin that called out to ask why Mizuki had stolen the forbidden scroll. "What are you planning, traitor?" The purple red girl asked with narrowed eyes and a readied kunai. "Figure out how to use a Mokuton technique or something." Mizuki's only response was a sudden Fuma shuriken flying at her. She dodged it easily, but failed to dodge the second one hidden in its shadow. It bore deep through her shoulder and sent her into a tree, lodging her in place. When her head connected with the thick bark of the tree, she was knocked out. Iruka looked over at the girl. "Anko!" he cried out in shock. The swordsman's eyes widened as he saw another Fuma shuriken flying at him, and he tried to call out in warning, but was cut off by a fit of coughs. The genetic disease that had been passed down in his family was acting up again, and at the worst time. Iruka was cut across the shoulder, deeply wounding him, and he lost his balance on the branch, falling off it with a scream in a 100-foot drop. Mizuki laughed as the swordsman dropped to one knee in his coughing fit and Iruka fell. The silver-haired Chunin smirked. "Fools. I told you this village is weak. No better than the damn trees surrounding it." Saying that, he turned and pulled a kunai out, ready to cut his way through the wall. He stopped when he heard a sudden cry of "Wood release. Bark fist." Quote, the bark of one of the trees in the wall formed into a fist before flying out and slamming into Mizuki, sending the former Chunin back. He cried out in pain as he felt something break. He looked up to see a shadowy figure running above his flying person. In a last-ditch effort, Mizuki tossed the kunai in his hand up, grinning as he thought he got the shinobi. The sudden squelch and jolt of pain he felt in his leg made him look down to see the kunai he threw embedded in his leg. He screamed before landing on a branch, crying out in pain and clutching at his thigh. He started to pull at the kunai when a young voice said, "You know, mister, Ka-san said that when you're facing someone of stronger strength, it's best to get the drop on them." Mizuki looked up through teary eyes as he pulled at the kunai to see a 6-year-old blonde with a grin on his face. He looked just like the Yondaime Hokage aside from the darker skin tone and weird markings on his chest, arms and face. He was wearing dark green shorts and had a belt made of vines bound around his waist holding his pants up. "What the, you little fucker!" Mizuki shouted. "Did you? No, you can't be a Senju. They're all dead." Quote, "No they aren't," the blonde said with a sad smile. "My Ka-san is the only remains of Senju within Konoha aside from Tsunade Heim. I guess for all purposes I am the last human Senju in Konohagakure." "Last human Senju," Mizuki repeated. "What the hell does that mean? Who made the forest surrounding the village, fool?" The blonde asked with a snarl. "Hashirama-sama. This forest and any other plant life he created is just as much a child of his as was Tsunade Heim's father." "You're fucked up, kid," Mizuki said, "but if you come with me, I'll introduce you to a man that can use a kid with your skills." "I don't deal with traitors or those that cause Ka-san harm," growled the blonde as he pressed his hand against the trunk of the tree branch he was standing on. The blonde smirked as the markings on his body glowed green and said, "Beg for mercy. Wood release. Binding prison." Quote, more branches grew from the tree Mizuki was resting on and surrounded the silver-haired Chunin. He gasped and dropped the forbidden scroll as he started doing hand seals for a Kaden technique, but was cut off when smaller branches grabbed and bound his wrists tightly. Now sealed in a cage-like cell, Mizuki struggled for a minute against his binds. The blonde boy took a step forward, making a bridge as he walked with branches. Mizuki screamed in fear. Who are you? Why you can't do this to me?" The silver-haired Chunin shrieked. The blonde rapped his knuckles on the prison bars and smiled. "I did, and will gladly do it again just to please Ka-san," he said. "As for who I am, well, I'll tell the swordsman coming to us." Wood release. Sleeping spores. Quote, a flower appeared in front of Mizuki's face and shot a cloud of spores at the man. He coughed for a bit before his eyelids grew heavy and his head slumped forward. The blonde smiled again and turned to the tree, giving it a pat on the side. silently telling his Ka-san to release the foolish traitor. As the swordsman landed on the branch the blonde was just on, he readied his sword in a defensive manner. "Identify yourself," the man said, aiming his blade at the boy. Once he realized it was a kid, he blinked and said, "Release the henge and identify yourself." "You know I'm not using a henge," muttered the blonde as he walked to the tree and started to mold into it. "As for who I am, you can call me Mokusei." -5 years later. This is Training Ground 44, the Forest of Death. A purple-haired woman proclaimed from the front of the gate. The many genin teams in front of her had mouths aga. Pei and a silent watcher from within the forest laughed. He was dressed in a torn mesh shirt that crossed over half his chest and a ripped pair of shinobi slacks. He was barefoot. His feet had become much more solid since his transformation. "Hear that, Ka-san? These fools are actually sending genin in here with us," the watcher said quietly. He was silent for another moment before he frowned in confusion. "So?" he asked before getting quiet once again. He sighed. Okay, Ka-san," the watcher said before he turned and jumped into the forest. "I still think you shouldn't have let Sarutobi or any of those other shinobi build a tower out here a few years ago." 45 minutes later, the watcher was following a group of genin that started at the closest areas to him. He narrowed his eyes at the boy with a fan on his shirt. Ever since he learned everything his Ka-san knew from Hashirama-sama's memories, he had been disgusted with Pen. He learned of the man that actually caused his status as a Jinchuriki. And he also happened to be a member of the clan that wore that symbol. Naruto despised them. They had no will of fire whatsoever, and all they desired was power. "So, Dickless," a pale boy with a fake smile on his face said, "what do we do now?" "Sai Baka," a pink-haired girl shrieked as she slammed her fist down on his head. "Don't insult Sasuke-kun like that." Sakura, Sai, the boy, Sasuke, said as he walked away from them and into the forest. "Shut up. Let's find another team and take their scroll." "Hi Sasuke-kun," the pink-haired girl, Sakura, agreed quickly. The fake smiling boy, who was known as Sai, simply remained quiet and followed them. Naruto narrowed his eyes and followed them from the trees. "Stupid Uchiha," muttered the blonde as he felt several of his trees fall from some giant force. "When you enter Ka-san's womb, you encounter the rest of her children. Pray you don't encounter me." The blonde leapt over towards where the trees were falling and scowled. He saw a giant gray snake slithering through the woods, destroying his Ka-san's many trees. The blonde narrowed his eyes. "Wood release. Root spears," Naruto said, pressing his hand against the tree he was on. A glow appeared on the boy's body markings as well as around his hand. 7 large roots shot from the ground and through the snake that was slithering along. One-shot throw. Hits head while the rest skewered it. The blonde scowled before turning to the tree and pressed his hand against it once again, making the roots return to their spot. He hopped down from his perch and examined the giant snake. "Snake summon," muttered the blonde. "Mitarashi-san isn't in here, or Ka-san would tell me, so that means Orochimaru." The blonde instantly got an idea as to why the traitorous Sannin would be in his forest. He ran back to where he last saw the Uchiha. He was too late. He glanced around and scowled at the damage. He walked to one tree that had a large burn on it and wrapped his arms around the trunk. "Poor Ka-san," he muttered as he shut his eyes. "No one ever cares if you get hurt anymore. He won't get away with this, I promise you." "No one will." The tree sp. routed 2 branches and hugged the blonde back. The forest then said something to him that made him growl quietly. He released the tree and closed his eyes as he merged with it. A few minutes later he appeared from a tree right behind 3 genin. They were all looking at the spot he once was at. "What are you doing?" he asked them. 2 of the 3 jumped in surprise while the last just turned and faced him with a bored face. "We were watching you," the bored one said. Naruto noted that he had red hair and dark circles around his eyes. His chakra gave off the scent of a biju and Naruto tensed slightly. Naruto knew his Mokuton would inform him if there was trouble, so he forced himself to loosen up. He studied the other 2 in order to relax. One was a girl that wore her hair up in 4 ponytails and had some large metal thing on her back. She was wearing a periwinkle battle dress and fishnet underneath, as well as on a bit of her leg. He had to admit she was fairly attractive, for a foreigner. The other boy was dressed in all black and had makeup on all over his face. The Mokusei noticed a bandaged pack on his back and stared at it for a moment before looking back at the group. Gaara, the blonde girl with 4 ponytails, hissed. The redhead ignored her. Naruto stepped forward with his hand out. It was not meant for a handshake though, it was pointing in the direction of the tower. Your exam tower is that way, he said coolly. Leave now. Gaara's eyes narrowed. Why? You are my guests in here, the blonde said, turning back to the tree he came from, along with a snake that I plan to kill. Do not get in my way, or you will meet his fate. What? Hey, fuck you, you tattooed hippie freak. The boy clad in black said, I'm not scared of you. The blonde stopped walking. He tilted his head slightly over his shoulder and said coldly, you should be. Goodbye, container of the Ikibi no Tanuki. The 3 genin's eyes were wide with shock. The redhead stepped forward. How do you know of mother? Because my demon is much more dangerous than the insane monk, the blonde said. The 3 all stepped back as he flared his chakra. Naruto looked over his shoulder at them and said one more thing before he left. Next time you kill someone, don't leave so much of a damn mess, he grumbled before he turned back around. Ka-san's gonna be having me clean them up for a few days. With that he molded back into the tree and the 2 older genin looked at their little brother. He was wide-eyed and shaking. He clutched his head and looked at his 2 siblings for a moment before he turned and walked towards the tower. The 2 exchanged a glance before following him, although at a distance. Seeing they were heading the way he wanted them to, Naruto left them alone and continued his search. Naruto followed the snake's scent and he came out on a tree across from a purple-haired kunoichi writhing in pain. Cursing his nobility for being larger than his want for vengeance, Naruto knelt next to the kunoichi he knew as Mitarashi. He used a medical scanning procedure before sighing in relief. Then his fear was realized. She opened her eyes and looked at him. Matera. She stared at the Yondaime Hokage and felt her heart clench in anger and fear. She swallowed before speaking. So, that bastard finally killed me, did he? It's about time. The Yondaime blinked before releasing a laugh. One that sounded much too young for a man his age. He looked back down at her with a small grin. That's why Ka-san and I like you, Mitarashi. You're always so funny. You aren't dead. Enko blinked in confusion. But, you're Yondaime-sama, aren't you? The Yondaime barked a laugh out. I forgot I look like him. I'm not. Yondaime-sama. Sorry about that, Mitarashi-san. Not Yondaime-sama, then who? She thought for a moment before she jumped up and pointed at him. Holy shit. You're that Mokusei. I thought you were a myth that Hayate was making up. There's a name I haven't heard in a while. The blonde muttered. He walked back to the tree and melded back into it, leaving a very confused woman behind. Enko rubbed the back of her neck before rushing towards the tower to speak with the Hokage and Hayate. She had a lot of teasing to make up for. Naruto left the purple-haired Tokuho to her own devices as he sought out the Uchiha's team. Eventually, he was alerted by his Ka-san as to where the blasted Uchiha was. The blonde scowled as he learned they had found one of his favorite sleeping areas. The tree they were hiding in was a very large redwood. Its base had been burrowed out by one of the many inhabitants of the forest. Using his wood style, gay as transport, the blonde Mokusei walked out of the tree and looked down to see 2 very unconscious members of the Uchiha's team. Naruto grunted in annoyance as he nudged the sleeping Uchiha with his foot. His Mokuton flared and Naruto's eyes narrowed quickly. He dropped to his knee and rolled the Uchiha onto his stomach before pulling his collar down. He saw a weird mark on the Uchiha's neck and he scowled again. The hell is that? The blonde thought with narrowed eyes. He paused and listened as Ka-san informed him of the snake Sanin's actions before. When the forest was done speaking to the blonde, he growled in fury and placed his hand over the mark. Sealing technique. Shodai seal. Naruto said, making his markings glow green and his chakra to flow over the mark. A green swirl appeared over the mark and it started to cause the tomos to fade. The blonde snorted as his ears caught wind of the fighting outside one of his many resting areas. This small fact upset him a lot. He stormed out of the tree and saw the girl with pink hair being held back by a girl wearing snakeskin clothes. A bandaged boy was beating on a boy wearing green. Naruto had watched this boy before, when he had looked similar to him. He believed the man to be the boy's father, and they both greatly amused him. Especially when he was in a foul mood. The boy was also pure of heart and carried the will of fire, so seeing the boy getting smacked around like a rubber ball caused Naruto's fury to rise even more. "You will stop this instant," roared the blonde, stopping the beating of the green-clad genin and earning the attention of the other teens, both visible and not. A boy wearing a mask similar to Tobirama sneered at Naruto. "And who are you supposed to be? A hero?" the boy asked. Naruto narrowed his eyes and then a scent hit him and he growled. "Snakes," he growled. You all smell like snakes." The boy smirked and raised his arm. "So what, Jungle Boy? I think you need a nap. A permanent one." An immense surge of energy grew in the boy's arm and a small hole opened. Naruto narrowed his eyes and slowly crouched down. The boy's smirk never died as he shouted, decapitating airwaves. Quote, "Several young trees were cut down and Naruto's rage grew. He pressed his hands to the ground and shouted, 'Wood release, oak shield.'" Quote, "The native genin all watching gasped in shock as trees burst from the ground and formed a small wall, defending the blonde from the airwaves." The boy growled and raised his other hand. The bandaged boy, who was holding the green-clad boy, turned to the other and shouted, "Zaku, you idiot. Don't use that, he's as good as dead." Zaku replied, "Extreme decapitating airwaves." Quote, Naruto saw even more young trees and even some matured trees fall. It made his blood boil with anger and determination to make this shinobi pay for hurting his Ka-san. For injuring the will of fire carrier. For hurting his Ka-san, and for being so damn proud of it. He slid into the trees before him with his Gaia's transport with a final thank you and apology to them before vanishing and allowing them to be destroyed. "Ha, see that, Dosu, told ya I'd kill him. Stupid Konoha shinobi," Zaku jeered, "I'm 10 times better than he was." "Then why am I right behind you?" Naruto asked from his spot on the tree behind the boy. The genin present gasped and Zaku growled in rage. I'll kill you." He raised his arms, but Naruto moved faster. He pressed his hand onto the tree and his body's markings glowed green. "Wood release. Vine trap," the blonde said, malice evident in his voice. Zaku's eyebrows furrowed in confusion when he suddenly was grabbed by several vines that shot from the ground. His arms were pulled to his side as Naruto's grin widened. "Now," the blonde said, "one chance to live. Apologize." "Never," Zaku shouted with anger at being caught in his eyes, "there's no reason to. We're enemies, you dumbass. I did no wrong to you," growled Naruto, "I even let you shinobi enter my forest." Zaku blinked. "Your forest? Ha, you're a freaking hermit. How sad." Naruto's eyes narrowed. "I'll say it once more. Apologize." Zaku only grinned defiantly. "I'd rather burn this whole fucking forest to the ground." Rage crossed Naruto's eyes and he smiled darkly. "I was hoping you'd say that. Wood release. Vine rack, execution." Quote, "Ooh." Zaku laughed, "I'm so scared. A rack. What if I get a bony rrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrrr protective nature of his domain because of his tenant's small hold on his head. As Zaku cried out in pain, many of the genin present were all sick as they watched the Oto nin slowly get torn apart. Eventually, Zaku found his desire to live greater than his desire to fight. "Stop. For the love of Kami, please stop," Zaku cried out, as one of his arms was dislocated. Naruto laughed. "I warned you," Naruto said with a shrug of indifference. The Oto shinobi exchanged a glance and dropped their hostages, rushing to help their teammate. Naruto grinned and left his hand on the tree. Ah, he chided, "That's cheating. Wood release. Root restraints." Quote, "The roots of the trees shot up through the ground and wrapped around the two Oto genins' ankles, keeping them from going to Zaku's aid." Speaking of the black-haired boy, his body was doing no better than his mind. The vines made one last tug and Zaku's arm gave. With that one tug, his left arm was torn out right from his socket. Zaku screamed in pain and agony as the vines released his arms. Naruto walked over to the downed Oto Genin and kicked him in the side, earning a new round of screams from the Genin as he landed on the fresh wound. "Now you wish you apologized, don't you?" muttered the blonde to the dying Oto Genin. He turned to the other two Genin. The bandaged one, Dosu, pulled a scroll from his back pocket. Here. Take it. It's yours, just let us go. This exam isn't worth dying for," the boy said as he threw the scroll at the blonde. Naruto made no move to catch or block it. He simply let it bounce off his shoulder and looked down at it. "What is this?" he asked, bending over, picking it up and looking back up at the two Oto Genin. The hidden Konoha Genin and Sakura were all wide-eyed in amazement. They thought for sure that he was from another village and taking the exam with them. He used Mokuton. Hyuga Neji thought from above the treetops, he must be a Senju. But how? Tsunade-sama left the village years ago. It's a heaven scroll, Dosu said before his eye widened in realization. "Why, you really are a hermit, aren't you?" "You can call me Mokusei," Naruto said as he walked closer. As soon as he got near Dosu, the bandaged Genin threw a punch with his gauntleted hand. Naruto caught the punch, causing Dosu's eye to widen once again. "Impossible," the Oto Genin breathed. Naruto increased his grip on his hand, crushing it easily with chakra-enhanced strength. "Not for the Mokusei aka me," the blonde said with a grin. He eventually broke the hand in his grip, snapping it away and throwing Dosu from his binds into another tree. With his Ka-san's assurance Dosu was dealt with, Naruto turned to the girl and studied her for a moment. She had long black hair. At least the bottom 3 inches of it was tied together in a wrap. The girl was wearing a slightly baggy khaki flak vest and snakeskin designed pants and scarf. He looked at her face and saw fear in her eyes. Slowly, Naruto raised a hand to cup her cheek, ignoring her flinch of fear. He studied her eyes and she stared back at him with them. They were a dark coal color, mixing well with her dark hair and lighter skin tone. With a flash of green on his skin, she passed out and Naruto slowly lowered her to the ground, where she then was covered by a cocoon of wood before it sank into the ground. He stood and looked at the pink-haired girl as his tribal marks stopped glowing. "Wake the Uchiha and the pale boy," he said. Sakura nodded, terrified and intrigued of the boy before her. He was very attractive, and if she guessed correctly, he was perhaps her age, but her obsession over Sasuke made her revert to being afraid of the blonde before her. Before she left, Naruto grabbed her shoulder and gave her the scroll that was at his feet. Shakily, the girl took it and looked back at the kind blue eyes laced with green around the pupils and a smile on his face. "Please make your way to the tower and get out of my woods," Naruto said with a firm, no questions asked, ordering tone. As the girl ran back to the tree where her teammates were, the blonde wild boy looked to a bush where another Konoha team was. "Come out before I make you come out," he said. Immediately, a platinum blonde girl wearing purple clothes and tape, a chubby boy with an odd headband, and a Ed-looking pineapple-headed boy walked out. The girl had hearts in her eyes as she looked at him, making Naruto blink in confusion. He looked at the one eating chips and scowled immediately, his confusion forgotten. "So you're the damned litterbug. I should have figured it was you," he growled as he pointed at the fatty. The boy stopped eating and swallowed as his food before looking at Naruto in fear. What?" he asked. Naruto growled. "Damned Akamichi," owards him and snatching his bag of chips before shaking said bag in his face. "You all don't consider what your little snacks, and I say the term lightly, does to my forest when y'all leave 'em on the ground. This is Konoha's training ground 44, the lazy one drawled, interrupting Naruto's rant. Naruto rounded on him with a glare. He shoved the bag of chips back into the Akamichi's arms before walking to the Nara, who sweated slightly under the intensive gaze. "You're damn lucky, Nara boy," the blonde growled as he poked him in the chest roughly. "Damn lucky that I appreciate what you do for Hashirama-sama's deer. Otherwise that super smart, lazy ass head of yours would be one of my tiger's personal chew toys. Never, and I mean ever call my forest a training ground for you goddamn shinobi." Naruto turned and walked back to the trees and used his Gaia's transport to leave back to the heart, the true heart, of the Forest of Death. The blonde girl of the group squealed at the wild boy's coolness factor before starting to rant about his hotness. The Nara groaned and thanked Kami he didn't wet himself while the Akamichi Ner. Vuli started to eat once again and followed as the Nara went to assist the members of Team 7. The team of the green-clad shinobi arrived and picked him up before going their separate way. Neji had been trying to figure out what the blonde boy known as Mokusei meant by this being his forest. He looked back to where the tree was and tried to use his Byakugan to find him. There was no such luck as he seemed to become part of the trees. Spirit of the wood indeed, thought Neji as he helped his female partner carry their green-clad friend back to their camp. He shuddered as he remembered the brutality shown to the one who disrespected the forest and prayed that Tenten didn't accidentally start a forest fire. Naruto walked away from the tree he had used to transport himself before molding into a much larger redwood tree. This is what he called Gaia, Hashirama's oldest tree, possibly the first tree of Konohagakure. Ka-san told him Gaia was where she first became self-aware, and so Naruto considered this to be his Ka-san's true form. He trained here, slept here, ate here, he did everything here. It was his home, and damn any who'd want to take him from it. He put his hand on T. He inside of the tree before kissing it softly. He smiled and whispered, "I'm back, Ka-san. I'm sorry Orochimaru got away, I'll get him next time." It was silent before Naruto nodded. "I figured I could perhaps learn more about Orochimaru from her, since he smells highly of snakes and isn't from Konohagakure. Information was useful, but it is very outdated." A branch formed and bopped him on the head, causing the blonde to chuckle. "It's the truth, you know." Naruto looked over to the wooden couch that was a part of Gaia and at the sleeping form on it. The blonde realized she might be out. For a while, considering his Senju style, sleeping stare was untested. He went to the middle of the tree and sat in the lotus position. Shutting his eyes and becoming part of the wood, his tribal marquee. NGSAN. Which on the face look like much longer versions of Mike Tyson's combined with the stripes on a tiger's face, covering both sides of his face and even coming close to linking at his forehead. The tattoos on his arms are similar to Jeff Hardy's right arm tattoo, but grow over his pecs and continue to branch towards his stomach, where they merge with the seal. From his back shoulders the ARM tattoos merge and grow into a tiger's face glowed green as a result, and his breathing slowed to a point where it was non-existent. He saw many dead genin and already saw several scavengers, such as the boar rats that were local delicacies for the oversized tigers. It was through the tigers that he gained the tiger contract, something that, although unknown to many of the villagers, once was used by Hashirama. He then saw that the genin he had interacted with were dilly-dallying with another silver-haired Konoha genin. Naruto snarled and opened his eyes, flaring his chakra and causing the sleeping Oto Kunoichi to stir. Naruto ceased his connection with the wood and stood, glaring down at the intruder and his prisoner. Although he was confused as to why she had given him an odd look upon her awakening. Her eyes sparkled with something he had never seen before. It intrigued him and made him wonder exactly what was going through her mind at that moment. The girl, Kintsuchi, was staring back at her captor with wide eyes. It was the boy that had brutishly killed Zaku and then Dosu. There was no telling what he had in mind for her, and it both frightened and excited her for reasons beyond her knowledge. Well, she did know she had a fetish for S&M, which was usually normal for Oto shinobi, so that might have been it, but why did she fear him? Because she feared dying, most likely. With a slight glow of the markings on his body, this only made his toned body much easier for the girl to see and caused her to blush. A wooden chair formed in front of her. Kin watched the blonde sit down in front of her and he gave her another look over before speaking. "Who are you?" he asked. "Kintsuchi, genin of Otogakure," Kin replied without haste. She'd seen what the blonde can do, and she had no desire to get on his bad side. The blonde hummed for a moment. "Why are you here?" "Our Otokage, Orochimaru-sama," Kin said, noticing the flare of chakra and growl that from the blonde at the mention of her cage's name. "Entered my team and I into the Chunin exams of your village." Naruto cut her off with a scoff. "Please. Just because Hashirama-sama was the Shodai doesn't mean I follow any of that village's ways. Continue." He signed us up for the Konohagakure Chunin exams to get us to test some Sasuke Uchiha kid, Kin said, having hesitated from how blatantly he insulted the most powerful village in the elemental nations. We were about to win. That pink-haired girl stopped us with horrible traps. She was then saved by the weirdo in green. Naruto growled, "Tread carefully, Suchi-chan." Kin gulped and bowed her head. "G. Gomen, I didn't know he was your friend." "Continue," the blonde said, crossing his arms and leaning back, not commenting on her observation. Kin hesitated once again, now because of the fact she could make out every curve in the blonde's arms and could see just how defined they were. "Kami-sama, help me," Kin thought with a blush, "they look so firm." "No, focus, Kin. Don't get distracted or he might kill you." Well, then you showed up and," Kin said before taking a calming breath as the memory of just how easily he killed Zaku and no doubt Dosu. "K killed my teammates Dosu and Zaku. Are you going to kill me, too?" "Do I have to?" he asked with narrowed eyes. Kin shook her head quickly in fear. The blonde kept his eyes narrowed for a moment before chuckling and standing. He yawned and stretched, earning another blush from the girl as his stretching caused his muscles to become even more visible. He walked away and Kin felt her eyes move to follow him, looking at his posterior with lust and unconsciously licking her lips. "You will stay here until these Chunin exams are over," the blonde said as he walked towards the wall. He looked over his shoulder and caught her staring at him, prompting him to ask, "What are you staring at?" "That deliciously tight ass," Kin thought before actually averting her eyes and speaking quietly, "And nothing, sir." "Right," Naruto drawled out, not believing her for a second. His Ka-san was laughing hysterically in his head and Naruto groaned from the small headache. The blonde looked back at the girl that was keeping her eyes glued to the floor. He then realized that she hadn't once called him by the title he gave to the bandage boy, Dosu. Naruto tilted his head and smiled slightly. "Oh, and call me Mokusei." Mokusei," Kin repeated and looked up, turning an even darker shade of red she believed herself capable of at the sight of his small smile. The blonde's smile grew slightly she reckoned fought to control herself from jumping him here and now. "Hi," the blonde said, "it is the name I was given upon my rebirth. It means spirit of the wood." Just how big is his spirit of the wood? Kin thought perversely before swallowing and nodding. "Oh okay, Mokusei-san." "Good," the blonde nodded before turning away again. "There is an extra shirt in the chest along with loose shorts. I'll be back with some rat meat later. Oh, and don't try to hurt Gaia-chan." With that he left by walking through the wall before she could even ask what he meant. Kin's mouth was completely unhinged and her eyes were as wide as saucers. Her lower area started to heat up and she swallowed before deciding to relieve some tension. Before she started she realized something he had said and thought aloud, "Rebirth. Then that means, goddammit, I don't even know his real name." Naruto stopped as he came out of a tree a few miles away from his home and sneezed. He wiped his finger under his nose and shrugged before resuming his small hunt. He came across the Uchiha's team and saw him using the damned eyes he despised so much. The pink-haired girl was unconscious and the silver-haired teen was healing her while the Uchiha and the pale boy fought against 3 genin with breathing masks and headbands with 4 vertical lines on them. He didn't care for the outcome of the fight, but he saw he damage that was being dealt by the Uchihas clearly lacks concern for the forest they were in. Naruto seethed and stomped forward. He entered the clearing and the fighting ceased when the shinobi sensed his anger rising. Naruto looked at the Konoha genin and other genin before looking at the area they were in. His temper rose and his killing intent started leaking out at the sight of many charred trees and senbon embedded in young saps, causing the genin and silver-haired medic to clutch their chests in fear. The only one who was trying to be unaffected was the pale boy, Sai, but even he was failing to do so. I'm so sick of you shinobi," growled the blonde, his tribal markings glowing green. He saw a tree he grew himself over 5 years ago for the first time had several senbon embedded in it. "Who did that?" he asked coldly. The rain nin all exchanged looks before one with 2 eye holes stepped forward. "We did," he stated proudly. "Why? I just wanted to say nice job," said Naruto, as his look turned into a sickly sweet smile that caused him to frighten even Sai. He pressed his palms together and said, "Let me show you my Senbon." Would release. Splinter Senbon. Quote. He aimed his fingers at the 3 and multiple Senbon shot from his fingertips. The genin were all shocked from this new problem to even consider moving. Only the leader and one carrying a crossbow had enough brains to move. The one frozen in spot became a human pincushion. Senbon was sticking from almost every inch of one side of his body. The Konoha genin all took a step back from the enraged blonde boy and their own thoughts running through their minds. Holy shit. He's brutal. Wait, maybe I can steal that technique. Sasuke thought, activating his Sharingan and aiming his eyes at the blonde. The second he did so, his eyes started to burn and he dropped to the ground clutching his face, groaning in pain. Gah, again, why can't I copy anyone's techniques? Why? Mokuton user. Sai thought, Danzo S. Ama will want to learn of this immediately. Mokuton, but I thought there was only one surviving child of that experiment. The silver-haired genin thought, did another survive and bear a child? If so, where is he or she? I must inform Orochimaru-sama. Naruto turned to the other 2 genin and pressed his hands to the ground. Would release. Root spears. Quote. This time the crossbow user failed to escape. His body was pierced by 3 nearby roots of a tree that had a few arrows in it. The leader landed on a branch above the blonde. He smirked behind his breathing mask. Looks like you got 2 out of 3, he said. But will you be able to get me? Playtime's over, asshole, growled the blonde as he ran towards a tree to his right. To everyone who could watch his shock, he molded into the tree and vanished. The Konoha genin were looking everywhere for him, as was the last remaining aim genin. A thought occurred in the leader's mind and he put his hands into the ram's seal. Kai, the leader aim genin shouted, flaring his chakra. He opened his eyes and saw that there was still no sign of the blonde. The Uchiha might have had to resort to genjutsu, but I don't, a voice said from everywhere at once. Despite this, the aim genin tried again and again, earning mocking laughter from the blonde. The aim genin backed into the tree and shook in fear, despite trying to calm himself. Where are you? He roared, face me coward. If that's what you want, a voice said from behind him. The aim leader slowly turned and, to his horror, saw the blonde slowly emerge from the tree with a large wooden spear in his hand. The blonde extended it and impaled the genin through the stomach. The aim leader cried out in pain, only for Naruto to twist the spear, earning another pained cry. Die, Naruto said, fully separated from the tree, as he pulled the spear back and drove his foot into the rain nin's face. The impact shattered not only the mask of the aim nin, but had enough force behind it to destroy a fully grown redwood. You can do the calculations from here, I'd expect. When the body hit the forest floor with a thud, Naruto dropped down and stormed over to the Uchiha. He grabbed the air by the collar of his shirt and snarled. Don't use Kaden in my forest ever again. The blonde snarled. Seeing the pale one approaching in his peripheral vision, he tossed the Uchiha back, lightly. Sasuke landed in a roll a good 10 feet away from the blonde. Sai went for his brush, but suddenly found his hands bound by vines. Naruto's tribal markings never stopped glowing and his eyes were narrowed. Don't, he warned the amateur artist, you have both scrolls. I told Pinky there that I wanted you all out of my forest. I mean it. Get your bastard eye user and get the fuck out. Sai simply smiled at the blonde's words. If that is what you want, dickless. Naruto didn't react, visibly anyway. The vines tightened and tugged at the bound arms of the artist. Sai blinked in shock and tried to pull back, only to find himself at this blonde's mercy. He clenched his teeth in order to keep from screaming in pain. Luckily for him, the silver-haired genin came to his aid. Would you please let my friend go? The medic asked the blonde. He didn't mean it. He's very new to talking to people. Same here, the blonde replied, I talk to trees. That doesn't excuse insulting your host. This is true, the medic said with a small frown. I'm sorry, I didn't get your name. I never gave it, nor did you give me yours. Ah, yes, forgive me, I am Kabuto. Quote. Now you tell me your name. What if I don't feel like it? I could always force it out of you. You were there when I killed those 3 genin without a sweat, right? Plus, you're in my forest. Major disadvantage. You're absolutely right. That and I don't need to fight a worthless battle if it means harming my forest. Ka-san is already very displeased with me and at my reactions. May I know your Ka-san's name? Gaia. Gaia. I don't understand. Exactly. Take these fools to the tower and leave. None of you are welcome back in my forest. Ever. But we're wounded. We won't be able to make it overnight if we're jumped. Not my problem. Excuse me. Sai butted in through gritted teeth. When both boys looked at him, he tried to smile but it came out pained. See, could you release me now? I am very sorry for my words. That's all I needed to hear, the blonde said, the glow of his body fading and the vines around Sai's arms going slack. He rubbed his arms and looked at Kabuto with what was the equivalent of a glare. For Sai anyway. Naruto simply turned on his heel and walked back to the trees. And without turning around said, I go by Mokusei. Mokusei. Kabuto repeated with shock. Oh God. The legendary guardian of the Forest of Death. His story has spread through Konoha for the past 5 years. And he's only a child. Amazing. Sai was having similar thoughts, his face still clear of emotion. His mind was officially blown away though. Every root shinobi knew the rumor of a Mokusei living in the forest surrounding Konoha that had started when the Tokuho Hayate returned. With Anko Mitarashi and Aruka Yumino unconscious and the traitor Mizuki in his custody. He even told the Hokage and council of this, but they all laughed it off and believed it to be a delusion of his illness. Even Danzo believed it to be a story, a good one, but a story nonetheless. Yes, now leave my forest, or die, the blonde said, still not turning around. Kabuto and Sai exchanged a glance and turned to grab the 2 unconscious members of Team 7. They darted off towards the tower in the center of the Forest of Death. Naruto waited 5 minutes before nodding and walking back into the tree and heading home. He was going to be busy for the rest of this exam. Naruto walked out of a tree and froze. A realization hit him as he realized the silver-haired teen was hiding his scent. Didn't even think of something to call the silver-haired teen's scent. Sai, the pale dumbass with a fake smile, smelled of ink. The pink-haired girl smelled of a cherry blossom and some other unknown scent that made Naruto want to puke. And the Uchiha, well, he smelt of torched meat. But that silver-haired teen, Kabuto, he gave off no scent whatsoever. This is very, very bad, he thought as he went into Gaia and stormed over to Kin. He grabbed her shoulder and shook her awake. Kin blinked and stared up into the angered eyes of the Mokusei. Do you know of a silver-haired teen that wears glasses and has medical skills? He asked gruffly. Kin, realizing the boy before her was deeply disturbed by something, searched her memory before paling slightly. Kabuto Yukushi, the girl said. Naruto released his hold on her and looked her in the eyes. They weren't the kind, entrancing eyes she got butterflies from, but a cold look similar to what she used to see when Dosu got angry. How strong is he? He asked her as he went to the chest behind the couch. He's Orochimaru's right-hand man, Kin said following the Mokusei with her eyes. Where did that come from? Ka-san gave it to me when I asked for it, he replied as he opened it and pulled a leather vest out. On it were designs similar to his body and 2 odd holsters on the lower part of his back. He then pulled out a pair of wooden tonfa, spinning them in his grip before flowing chakra through them and forming a pointed tip at the ends of the tonfa. He grinned slightly before placing them behind his back in the holsters. He then pulled a shuriken pouch out and vines came up from the ground to flow through the hole in the pouch while he held it near the back of his pants. Once the vines were tight, he tugged on the pouch to make sure it wouldn't drop. He then dug around again and pulled out green tape. What are you doing? Kin asked as he wound the tape around his hands. Once he finished, he punched each of his palms lightly and clenched his hand tightly. I'm going snake hunting, the Mokusei said. He stood and the chest returned back to the ground. Naruto looked back at Kin and hesitated before asking, is there anything I can do for you? Short of let you go. Take me now, Kin thought before blushing and shaking her head, and no, Mokusei-san. Naruto nodded and turned to leave. I'll be back at dinner then. He vanished with his Gaia's transport and Kin sat down with a slightly depressed look on her face. Deciding not to pout, Kin chose to revert to getting some more well-deserved sleep and hopefully Continue that dream concerning a wild blonde boy, whipped cream, and some nice chocolate ice cream. A small blush appeared on the former Oto Kunoichi's cheeks as she laid back down on the couch. Not soon after her eyes shut did a smile appear on her face as the image of a glowing green tattoo-covered boy filled her head. I still can't believe Ka-san let them do this, Naruto thought as he walked out of a pine tree near the tower. He grumbled angrily for a moment before walking up to the door he'd seen the few shinobi do. Pressing his hand against the door, he felt immediate pain come from it and growled. Willows, he grumbled out before pushing the door open. Sarutobi isn't going to live this down, not by a long shot. He walked through the tower, glaring at anyone who tried to stop him and flaring his chakra continuously. Eventually he came upon two large steel doors and behind them several scents hit him. With a growl, he kicked the doors open, gaining everyone who was present's attention. The Jonin senseis all gasped when they looked him over and Hayate and Anko smirked. I told you he was real, Nai-chan, Anko whispered in her friend's ear. Naruto stormed forward, bluntly ignoring most of the genin and looking around before his eye locked on a silver-haired glasses-wearing medic. A small smile came on his face and he reached behind him to pull a tonfa out. Oh, Kabuto, he said quietly. Earning a gulp from said teen, I need to talk to you. I'm sorry, but who are you? A silver-haired masked man asked him. Naruto glared at the intruder and his markings glowed brightly. He took a small whiff of the man's scent and scowled. Beat it Uchiha, I'm busy, he growled before storming over to the teen he came for. He started twirling his tonfa and Kabuto started backing up. The silver-haired genin reached into his back pocket and pulled a hooked kunai out. And now Mokusei-san, Kabuto stuttered out as he realized his goose was, for lack of a better term, cooked. Don't go too far, I've got a Chunin exam. TCH, like I give a damn, Naruto said, pulling his second tonfa out and twirling both with expertise. Eventually he came to a stop in a stance with his right hand crossed over his chest. The tonfa resting on his arms and his left hand back towards his side with the longer side of the tonfa pointing at Kabuto. Hayate looked at the Hokage and Sarutobi hesitated before nodding. A disguised rain shinobi hissed in displeasure while the combatants and their sensei left the arena. Hayate leapt away to a safer distance before speaking. Pre-prelims match, Kabuto Yakushi vs. the Mokusei, Hayate said, earning some more muttering from the group, Hajime. Kabuto rushed the blonde who narrowed his eyes and brought his tonfa up in an X to block the attempted and sloppy stab. Something is definitely wrong here, the Mokuton user thought as he deflected or dodged the sloppy movements, like he's trying to hide his, a spy then, well, Mr. Spy, let's see how good you are. Naruto leapt back and put a bit of distance between him and the silver-haired genin before twirling his tonfa again. He suddenly shoved both of his hands forward and the grips of his tonfa slid to the end of the weapon. Flicking his wrists, the tonfa reformed into two billy clubs. His markings turned green and Naruto grinned. Would release. Gaia Nunchaku. The blonde said, shocking every Konoha shinobi, present and former, with his exclamation. The clubs in the blonde's hands glowed before separating at the center and vines grew between the separated bits. Konoha shi. Nobi began exclaiming quietly at the sight of a Mokuton user and a few counselors were plotting on how to get a hold of that power for themselves. Normally I'd be impressed that I'd have to go this far, Naruto said, keeping the audience's and his opponent's attention, but I know you're holding back, Yakushi. Please, don't insult me. Kabuto paused before glancing at where his lord was. The camo, Uflaged missing nin nodded causing Kabuto to grin and readjust his glasses. The blonde across from him rolled his neck and shoulders before he started to spin the nunchaku in an experienced manner. He finished with both nunchaku being held between his sides and tossed the kunai at the blonde, who merely flicked one of his nunchaku forward and deflected it, before holding his hands out to the side, acting a sickly green chakra form around them. Chakra scalpels, Kabuto said, forming said weapons in his hands before rushing at the blonde with the speed of a jonin. Naruto's eyes narrowed and he suddenly turned to the left, swinging his nunchaku out. Kabuto had little time to dodge and barely did so, but not without suffering. He suddenly felt a large invisible force impact with his side as He leapt away and skidded back farther than he intended. The silver-haired teen glared at the Mokuton user who spun his nunchaku once again before collapsing them in his hands. He slid them into place on his back and settled into a familiar stance to a few shinobi. Two green-clad shinobi gaped and exclaimed simultaneously, "T the Goken." The Jonin next to them and Genin all turned to them in shock. The silver-haired Jonin with a mask and one eye visible asked, "What? Are you sure, Guy?" "Hi, my rival," Guy said, clenching the railing tightly, "and that's no joking stance, from here even I can tell he's mastered it. It took Lee a good year before he's completed the basics and is halfway through the main training, but this boy, he's something else." Naruto narrowed his eyes before a small grin appeared on his face. He vanished in a blur and only a few could follow him. Sasuke tried to use his Sharingan again but had to bite his lip in order to keep from crying out in pain and frustration at the attempt. Kakashi had slid his forehead protector up and was following with his Sharingan, but barely. "Leaf Whirlwind," the blonde's voice announced, his figure appearing as he delivered a devastating leaping roundhouse to Kabuto's face. The silver-haired spy was sent flying into the wall and raised a blue hand to heal himself, but Naruto was keeping up the barrage. "You're good, Nar," Yuto said before vanishing and reappearing behind the now standing Kabuto, "but I'm better." He kicked straight upwards as Kabuto turned, to be nailed in the chin with a destructive force, sending him into the air. Naruto's marks glowed again and he pressed his hands to the ground. "Would release. Monolith," the blonde said. A rumbling was heard and the ground cracked and broke as a large wooden mass shot up, slamming into Kabuto's back and carrying him through the roof of the tower. The silver-haired spy felt immense pain as he went through 5 floors of pure wood and concrete. His ribs were, no doubt, broken into tiny fragments and he couldn't feel or move his jaw. His arms, which one still had the chakra scalpel active, were burning from the pain of being shoved through the floors. They probably would be useless for a while now. Naruto heffed before leaping onto the monolith and running up it. Hayate looked at the Hokage who shrugged. Hayate looked back up the hole and called, "Give him hell, Mokusei." The blonde ran to the top of the monolith and skidded to a stop before his tattoos glowed once again and a new standing spot appeared for the blonde. Naruto walked onto it and looked down at the silver-haired teen who was coughing blood and debris up. Kabuto looked back at him and scowled as he tried to stand. "D-damn you," the spy said. Naruto returned the glare and scowl and raised his right arm. "Would release," he said as his tattoos glowed once again. Kabuto coughed harder and brought his chakra scalpel up in an effort to strike him in the heart. "Die," the spy shouted as he ran towards the blonde. "Splinter Kunai," Naruto shouted, clenching his fists and aiming them down, firing a makeshift of wooden kunai at the spy from the tops of his wrists. Kabuto was struck in his chest, thighs, and neck, but still ran at him. "I cannot die here," Kabuto said as he bled out and slowed down. Naruto then raised his left fist, driving it into the already dazed face of the spy. He grabbed Kabuto by the shirt and jumped off the left of the monolith, falling at a high speed towards the roof of the building. Naruto began to spin the both of them in the air as Vin-S emerged from his wooden weapons and bound around the both of them. Mokusei style. Front Lotus. The blonde cried as they span at a blinding speed. The observers were all ready to start the next match when they felt a crash. They all looked up to see the two fighters spiraling down towards the arena. RRRAAAAHHHHH. Naruto roared as they neared the ground. When they impacted there was no sound. For a moment before the dust shot up and an ear-shattering boom spread throughout the arena. Everyone watching had to cover their faces with their arms, even those who had seen much worse did so if only for protection. From the rubble, a figure stood with a smoky outline. Naruto slid his vest off and tossed it at the monolith, which seemed to absorb it, before he bent over and picked the silver H-aired genin that was bleeding profoundly up. He turned and his tattoos glowed once again, making the monolith vanish, before looking up at the window where the Hokage and council were all looking at him with shock and awe. The blonde narrowed his eyes before tossing the body of the spy at the window. "Oh, my God," one council member shouted before everyone, save the Hokage, leapt out of the way of the flying body that broke through the window. The crinkle of someone walking on shattered glass alerted them to the Mokusei walking towards them. Anbu suddenly surrounded the blonde and he looked at the Hokage. "Could you please call your lapdogs off, Gigi?" he asked. The council members all went slack-jawed at that while the Hokage simply chuckled. He dismissed the Anbu before turning to the blonde. "So what brings you here, Mokusei-kun?" Sarutobi asked. Naruto growled before leaning against the wall and making his tattoos glow once again. A sudden wall of wood came up over where the glass ONCE was and Naruto grinned at the shocked looks of the council members. "Oh, you know," he said, standing and inspecting his nails, "this, and that, oh, and the fact Orochimaru is in your village." "What?" the council roared in shock. They all looked at the Hokage who narrowed his eyes at Naruto. "I've left you alone after your warning, Mokusei-kun," he grumbled. "What do you want from me now?" Yuto eyed the Hokage before flashing him a grin. "You found a way around that, Gigi. I want my part of the bargain revoked. Unless you can find something to satisfy me, the forest and I will find shelter elsewhere and not assist in your upcoming battle." "Upcoming battle?" the Hokage and council chorused in confusion. Naruto scoffed. "Please," he said with a roll of his eyes, "Orochimaru being here, marking that Uchiha with a weird seal. Not to mention the fact I had just killed not one, but 3 Odo shinobi and I have another in my own realm. You must give them to us then, boy," roared a civilian councilman. The Hokage glared at the councilman before looking worriedly at the blonde before him. Naruto closed his eyes and his markings glowed. Suddenly, a tree sprouted behind the councilman, and that spoke and started to wind its limbs around him. The other council members jumped back in shock as the tree limbs tightened around him, causing the councilman to cry out in agony. "Mokusei, release him," the Hokage shouted, not out of worry for the councilman but for what could happen to the blonde child. Naruto glared at the Hokage and his markings glowed brighter. "No," he said after a moment. The council looked in shock at the boy and one of the Hokage's advisors stepped forward. "You listen, boy, and you listen well," Homura said. "The Hokage, your leader, has given you an order. Do as he says." Naruto glanced at Homura and smirked. "I am no civilian of Konoha, nor am I one of its shinobi. I am the Mokusei. My duty is to my home alone, which is the forest surrounding Konohagakure no Sato. And, from what I can tell, some of you want my abilities for your own perverse use." The council all blinked in shock and the Hokage scowled, stepping towards his advisor. Homura, "Let it go." But high in shock, he was silenced by a glare from the more powerful shinobi and took a step back. Naruto dropped his smile and his glowing tattoos ceased to glow. The pain-stricken councilman was dropped unmercifully to the ground and Naruto scoffed before turning to the wall of wood. "I do not know when this battle will take place," the blonde said, "nor do I want to be a part of it. Unfortunately, shinobi of this day and age do not care for the surroundings so long as their enemy dies. Promise me, Sarutobi Gigi, that you'll send no Konoha shinobi into the wood during the battle and I will. I'll promise none will be harmed by myself or any threat to Konoha." Sarutobi looked back at the council and some looked indecisive, Danzo especially. He looked back at Naruto who had a small smug gleam in his eye. The Hokage sighed before scratching the back of his head and sighing in defeat. "We will have to hold a meeting about it," he told the blonde. Naruto looked from the Hokage to the council and back before shrugging. "Whatever," he said, waving his hand over the wood wall, making it vanish back into the ground. He looked back at Sarutobi and said, "Just send Mitarashi when you wanna talk." "Surely you jest," one councilman started but stopped when Naruto's tattoos flickered. He glared at the councilman and looked back at the Hokage. "Mitarashi," he said, "anyone else will be food for the animals within Ka-san's womb." The council all blinked in confusion but Sarutobi nodded. Naruto nodded back and hopped back out of the room through the window he appeared in. The council looked back at Sarutobi before they burst into uproar for an explanation. Sarutobi smirked and ignored them as he watched the blonde walk past the odd genin. Naruto was just about to leave when his emo gay asshole sense tingled. He looked over his shoulder to see the Uchiha staring him down. He smirked and said, "How's my seal? Keeping Orochimaru off your back? It's not bothering your eyes at all, is it?" Sasuke's eyes widened and he leapt at the Mokusei with a roar before anyone could stop him. Naruto grinned and held one hand up as his markings glowed green. Would release. Bark fist. He said. From a tree nearly 14 meters away, a large fist of bark flew over Naruto's shoulder and slammed into Sasuke's face and upper torso. His sensei, the Cyclops, rushed to his aid and started moving his head up. Naruto's eyes narrowed and he vanished in a swirl of leaves and reappeared behind the Sharingan user, his tattoos still glowing. Let's see how strong an Uchiha is when he's blind, roared the Mokusei. Sealing technique. Shodai's seal. Quote. He slammed his hand onto the back of the silver-haired Jonin's neck, causing him to collapse to the ground. The genin all stepped back in shock, save one. Take a guess. And the Jonin readied themselves for a fight. Naruto scoffed and kicked the downed Uchiha in the gut, making him roll over as he clutched his eye and writhed in pain. Kakashi-sensei. The pink-haired girl shrieked. She took a step towards Naruto, but the Hokage appeared before her and looked down at Naruto. What did you do, Mokusei-kun? He asked as he knelt next to Kakashi and looked the seal over. Naruto sneered at the downed Jonin and started to retreat into the woods. I did him a favor, Naruto said to the old man over his shoulder. I might remove his seal if you can find something I want. Goodbye, Gigi. He walked back into his home to find the Oto Kunoichi again asleep on the couch. The Mokusei allowed a small smile on his face as he watched her leap before it turned neutral once again. Dropping the carcass of the dead boar into a storage area behind the couch, he then walked back around to examine his guest. He knelt next to her and shook her shoulder, watching as she woke up slowly. About time, Naruto muttered as he sat on the stool that once again appeared as he started to sit. You know, if the couch is too uncomfortable, I can make something more comfortable. And no, this is fine, Kin said, again not meeting his eyes. She couldn't after the dream she had about those eyes. And that smile, and some other more unmentionable parts of a male anatomy. Naruto shrugged and went over to a side of the tree and pressed his hand against it. Emerging from the ceiling of the hollowed tree were many vines. They looped and intertwined together, forming a makeshift hammock. The Mokusei smiled slightly as he stripped his shirt off and rolled into the hammock. He sighed in contentment as he stretched out in the hammock, unaware of the eyes watching him from the other side of the couch. Oh, my, damn, Kin thought as a trail of blood leaked out of her nose. It's as though he was sculpted from marble. Kin lied back down on the couch, trying to keep herself from leaping over the side and jumping the young Mokusei. She doubted he'd enjoy that, despite what her own urges were telling her, and he'd probably kill her or something for waking him up. Kin shook those thoughts from her head. Mokusei didn't seem to be that cruel or hateful, so long as you don't harm the forest. Her eyes widened in realization as she remembered something. Mokusei-san, she squeaked out. A grunt came from where the blonde lay. Yes Kin? He asked. Kin felt butterflies in her stomach from hearing him say her name but steeled herself before she continued. There's something I need to tell you, about why Lord Orochimaru, she said, earning a growl from the blonde. I know why he's here, and I don't need to know anything about the invasion, the blonde's voice muttered back. Kin's eyes widened. How did he know? She thought worriedly, is he going to get rid of me if I'm no longer useful? Kin, his voice called out. Kin swallowed in fear before hesitantly replying. Hi, Mokusei-san. I'm not going to kill you. Why you're not? She asked, straining to look over the side of the couch. She yelped when the couch back switched day and she could see the blonde lying there, staring at the ceiling, half naked, and practically oozing pheromones. He turned his head as his tattoos stopped glowing and looked at her, his cerulean blue eyes revealing everything and nothing at the same time. No, he said simply before looking back up at the ceiling. I have to wait until the council decides you're worth anything before I can release you. See council? Kin asked. The Konohagakure Council, he said. I've informed them of the attack, that you're in my realm, and that I have information about the invasion. Kin's eyes widened in shock. You lied. Yes, he said simply. I'm not under any oath for Konohagakure. For all I care, they can kiss my ass. Now let me sleep. I have to cook dinner in a half hour before resuming my patrol. Good night, Kin. Tsuchi. Kin was amazed. She thought for sure he was the guardian of Konohagakure considering he lived in the forest. Maybe she stood a chance after all. Kin shook that thought from her head and resumed just watching the blonde from her place on the couch. Eventually the silence got to her and Kin fell back asleep, dreams of the mysterious Mokusei filling her head. What was that all about, Sarutobi? Homura asked as he and his fellow Hokage's assistant, Kaharu, followed the Hokage into his office. The Mokusei and I have a history, Sarutobi replied as he sat down. He placed his hands together in a thinking manner before waving his hand, summoning the Anbu within the room. They all bowed before standing at a slight ease. Hi, Hokage-sama, one of them, wearing a Neko mask asked. Please leave the room, he said. The Anbu all exchanged a look with each other before looking back at the Hokage and nodding. They then exited the room in an orderly fashion. When the door shut with a click, the Hokage performed a silencing jutsu. What I am about to tell you is a double S-rank secret, he said to his advisors. Homura and Kaharu exchanged a look before sitting across from their old friend and teammate. Sarutobi sighed as he removed the Hokage hat and set it on his desk. You are both aware of the death of Uzumaki Naruto, yes? Homura corrected, not forgetting that Sarutobi had released the truth of Naruto's heritage to the village in an effort to punish them. The villagers couldn't believe how they acted and a few actually committed seppuku to atone for what they had done. Sarutobi showed no difference to those that acted out against the Jinchuriki, but he had easily forgiven them, too easily in Homura's opinion. Hi, Sarutobi said with a small nod, he is not dead. What? The two advisors chorused in shock. The Hokage nodded solemnly. That boy earlier, Kaharu said in realization, that was Uzumaki. No, Sarutobi said shaking his head, he has dropped that surname. I wouldn't be surprised if he took up the Senju name. Where has he been for the past 6 years? Homura asked. Sarutobi smiled slightly. In the Forest of Death, the Hokage said. At their astounded faces, Sarutobi continued, let me tell you of my first encounter with the Mokusei. It all started for me about 4 years ago, Sarutobi told his advisors. In fact, it was during the council meeting held concerning the sudden vandalism going on throughout the village. 4 years earlier, Hokage-sama, this is an outrage. The head of the shop owners guild councilman Doru Daisen shouted. Shops all over are being destroyed in the middle of the night and no one has been caught yet. What kind of shops are being targeted? Shinobi weapons shops, scroll shops, Hyuga Hiyashi asked. Doru shook his head. More like food stands and clothing stores. The shop owner said, it's infuriating. I demand something be done about this before it will affect our villagers' taxes. More like your own taxes. Shikaku muttered with an eye roll. His associates Chozu and Inoichi chuckled at his words while several other clan heads smirked. Doru glared at the Nara clan head and brought his fist down onto the table. This is no joking manner. The vandalism could bankrupt us should we leave it alone, Doru growled. This is why I suggest Hokage-sama puts a small SQU ad of interrogators together and find the fiend. I second that, a civilian councilman said. And I as well, Danzo said from his spot. Should we allow the ruffian who was doing this get away, Searle? Why soon enough it could draw the attention of other villages and possibly could cause us to fall. The unanimous uproar of agreement was deafening to the Hokage. He raised his hand and called for silence before speaking. I approve the suggestion and will put forth some interrogators that Inoichi can spare for this investigation. Seeing as this was the last topic of issue, I call this council meeting dismissed. Good day to you all. At your leave, Hokage-sama, the council all chorused, leaving one at a time. Once they left, the Hokage stood and went out of the council room to his own office. Seeing the mountain of paperwork, Sarutobi sighed and decided it would be time to get away from it and take a stroll over to the academy to see what the youngest group of students were doing. The Academy students were all abuzz when he arrived behind their teacher. The new Chunin head of schools, Uruka Yumino, was teaching these new students the basics of chakra when he entered. Sarutobi looked over the class and noticed an empty chair in the back of the room. There was no sign of anyone sitting there, and immediately, Sarutobi knew who he had saved that extra spot in this class for. Well class, it seems we have a guest, Uruka said. The Hokage has decided to join us today. I will allow a short break of studies if that is okay with him. Hokage-sama, oh yes, it's quite fine, he said to the young Chunin. Just lost in reminiscing. Excuse me, Hokage-sama. A timid girl with pale eyes asked with her hand raised. The Hokage nodded and she continued, WYA or YUS staring A at T the B back of T the room. The other students all turned to see if they could find what had held the Hokage's gaze, only to turn back when he chuckled somberly. At their confused glances, the Hokage sighed and decided to break a few truths to the students. I'm sure you are all now aware of a young blonde named Naruto. Nay, he asked. The students started whispering. Of course they had heard of Naruto. He was the homeless heir to the Namikaze clan and the Jinchuriki of the Kyuubi no Kitsune that had died more than 2 years ago. It was scary to some of them that a boy that young could hold that much power. But it made others curious as to what he was like. Well, the Hokage continued, I had originally planned for Naruto to join the academy this year. Alas, he is gone now and I ever took the time to find a replacement. The whispers grew and Iruka's jaw dropped. He would have been teaching the Kyuubi container. What would that have been like? Would the child have been dangerous to teach? Or would he have another troublemaker like he used to be in an effort to gain attention? I want you all to know, that no matter what any adult says, Naruto Namikaze is as much a hero as Minato Namikaze, the Yondaime Hokage. Was, Sarutobi said, I had personally talked with Naruto and he was no monster. He was a child just like any of you. Unfortunately, some of the people within THE village are unaware of how to let go of the past. This is a lesson we must learn. The past and present could have the darkest of clouds, but there's always of hope for sunshine in the future. Having said what he believed was necessary, the Hokage made his leave. He walked along the forest edge and under a spur of the moment, he decided to go visit the tombstone of Hashirama Senju, his old master. Upon entering the clearing in the wood, several trees shot up from behind him, managing to knock out the Anbu squad assigned to watch him. Sarutobi narrowed his eyes and readied himself, but he wasn't ready for what happened next. Gigi, a young voice asked from the woods. Sarutobi's heart clenched, but he hardened his resolve. You think that by defiling a child's memory that I will allow you to escape? Sarutobi growled as he pulled his cage robes off and revealed his battle armor. You think wrong. Come out and face me. A small figure landed in front of the battle-ready Hokage, making the cage's eyes go wide. His arms dropped to his side and he took a step back. The boy before him was wearing baggy shinobi pants that were rolled up at the end to allow his feet freedom and he wore a full fishnet shirt. His blonde hair was long, but was pulled back to be kept out of his eyes. Naruto? Sarutobi asked. The child seemed to relax and the glowing marks on his body stopped glowing green. Hello Gigi, the child said with a small smile, how've you been? I've been fine. No wait, where the hell have you been? Sarutobi asked with a yell. Naruto smiled and gestured to the woods. With Ka-san, he said. Come to see Hashirama-sama. Ka-san says you visit him and Tobarama-sama a lot. Ka-san. Sarutobi stuttered. Is Kushina here? Who? Oh, Uzumaki heiress. Nah, she's not here, Naruto said. Interlocking his hands behind his head, Ka-san says she hasn't been here for a while now, something like 7 or 8 years. Naruto, who is this Ka-san? Sarutobi asked, narrowing his eyes and readying his guard. Naruto snickered, causing Sarutobi to raise an eyebrow. Ka-san doesn't want to fight you, Gigi, Naruto said with a smile, nor do you want to fight her. Oh, and why is that? Sarutobi asked, not moving from his position. Naruto snickered. Cuz Ka-san already has you outnumbered, Gigi, Naruto said with a small grin. His grin dropped, and if you try and hurt her, I'll kill you. Quote. Sarutobi's eyes widened. What? I won't let anyone hurt Ka-san ever again, the blonde said, settling into a familiar fighting stance across from Sarutobi. The Hokage's eyes widened. That's Hashirama-sensei's, he started. Naruto's eyes narrowed. Hi, the blonde said as his markings glowed green once again, his Goken. The technique he taught to Maida Sai, who was barely adept at anything but taijutsu and doden. I have started learning it, and according to Ka-san, I am your monkey's fist. Sarutobi sighed and dropped his stance, opting to go for a more peaceful approach. Naruto, just tell me what happened to you, and we can make this right. I can take you back into the village. No, I won't go back, Naruto shouted, rushing at the Hokage. He leapt into the air and began a spinning roundhouse, crying out, Leaf Whirlwind. Quote, Sarutobi barely had time to block. When Naruto's heel connected with his arm, the Kage issue arm guard fractu. Red from the pressure of the chakra-enhanced attack, making the Hokage's eyes go wide. Naruto was glaring holes into Sarutobi's head for his suggestion. Okay, I won't take you back to the village. Sarutobi shouted out. The blonde pushed off of the arm he was being blocked with and landed a good 4 feet away from the Hokage, who was looking on in awe at the blonde. Naruto smiled and his glowing stopped. Good, he said as he started to walk back into the woods, you probably want answers, so follow me, Gigi. We're more secure with Ka-san than in that village. Sarutobi followed the blonde, for a good 20 minutes into the woods until they stopped walking. Naruto's markings glowed again and a table with 2 chairs appeared. A custom shogi board sprouted from the table and Naruto sat down on one side. Swinging his legs childishly, wanna play a game before business, Gigi? He asked with hopeful eyes, it's been a while since anyone came to play with me. Anyone came to play with you? Sarutobi chorused as he sat down, who played with you Naruto? Couple o ninjas, he said, moving a piece and still kicking his legs, one of them has a cool sword and he coughs a lot, but Anyo. Their guy had 7 swords and he had white clothes on. Said he was visiting with his brother, but I could tell he was special like me. Special like you? Sarutobi asked as he pondered the blonde's seemingly random move before making his own move. What do you mean? Well, I can't tell you, Naruto said as he cocked his head and moved another piece. I pinky swore I wouldn't tell anyone about Hi's secret and he didn't tell his brother about me, so long as I gave him his own forest to play in. Sarutobi frowned. That Naruto was this trustworthy with a complete stranger worried him. He could already tell he had Mokuton. Anyone with brains could deduce that from what the blonde was saying. Add that and a large knowledge of seals, you could tell the markings on Naruto's body were seal tattoos that allow him to have a greater control over the Mokuton than that of the resident Anbu Mokuton user, Tenzo. He looked down at the board for a moment and made another move. You can't even tell me? Sarutobi asked. Naruto shook his head. Pinky swears are legit. Faux shit, the blonde recited, that's what the man said to me. Ka-san also has been watching him, so I can trust him. He moved a peek, and then looked up at the older shinobi. Sarutobi looked down at the board for a minute before moving his knight and taking a pawn. Check, the Hokage said, now this other swordsman with a cough, his name is Hayate. Naruto answered while looking down at the board and moving a rook to take the Kage's knight. He's nice. He wants me to be there when he and his fiancée get married. Sarut. Obi chuckled as he moved his silver general, does he now? And when is that? 2 years, maybe 3, the blonde said as he moved his gold general. Check. Sarutobi smiled and looked down at the board, studying it before going slack-jawed. He resigned himself and chuckled before bowing his head. I resign. You are very good, Naruto-kun. That's 'cause Ka-san gave me your strategy before we played, the blonde snickered, but you did pretty good. I had to make up a new strategy from scratch. Hashirama-sama didn't have a strategy to use against his own combined with Tobirama-sama's. His tattoos glowed once again, and the wooden game board vanished. Naruto looked up with a smile at the older man's shocked face. Sarutobi stuttered for a moment before asking, Naruto-kun, who is this Ka-san of yours? The forest, Naruto said as though it was obvious. Sarutobi blinked and looked around him seeing the trees, limbs blow in a non-existent wind. It was as though the forest was giggling. So, this forest is your Ka-san? The Kage asked the young blonde. Naruto nodded. Hi, he said, Ka-san hasn't let many people come into the forest this far ever since your first reign as Sandaime Hokage, Gigi. She doesn't blame you, and I don't either, so you can visit whenever you want. But we have a couple conditions first. Oh, and what are these conditions? Sarutobi asked with an arched brow. Naruto nodded and his face grew serious, a strange sight to see on a child, before he spoke again. We don't want anyone to enter the forest of death for the hell of it, he said with a scowl. They go in, kill random animals and destroy tons of trees, and then leave without considering the after effects. Our second condition is that you stop using my old name and continue with the story that I died. Your old name? Sarutobi asked with a confused look. What do you mean? I no longer go by Naruto Uzumaki, the blonde said, nor will I go by the Namikaze clan name. My new name, if I ever do return to that village, is Senju. If I return at all, that is. Until that time may come. Call me Mokusei. Once he recovered from the shock of the name the boy chose, Sarutobi chuckled and shook his head. Mokusei. The spirit of the wood. Fitting, considering there is already a rumor of you going around the village. I will keep that in mind. Naru Air, Mokusei-kun. But there is something I want you to do for me in return. Naruto pouted. You want me to stop spray painting and pranking the shops, huh? Sarutobi laughed. I would like that. If you could be so kind as to show me my way. Back to the Anbu group we left back at Sensei's memorial. Okay, Gigi, but first things first, Naruto said, holding his hand up and pinky out. Sarutobi chuckled once again and locked his pinky with Blonde's earning a small smile from him. Present. And that's the day I learned Naruto was still alive, Sarutobi said with a small sigh. The two advisors were amazed by the skill shown from the boy at that age. It explains a lot. Homura mused, but we certainly cannot go to the council with this. The civilians anyway, they would possibly bring his wrath upon us. That or try and recruit him into Danzo's puppets. Kaharu said with a small scowl. We do need someone to play messenger with him for us. We can't risk Mitarashi though, she's too good a member of the INT division. I agree, Kaharu, Sarutobi said with a nod before a small smile appeared on his face, and I know just the person to do it. Naruto bit into another chunk of boar meat and ripped it from the bone. Kin watch. The barbaric manners the otherwise perfect, in her opinion, boy was displaying with awe. It kind of made sense that he had no manners, seeing as he lived in the forest, but Kin could barely keep herself from getting completely disgusted. She should be less concerned with Naruto's eating habits considering that Zaku and most of the other male members of Otogakure were worse than him. Naruto swallowed his bit of boar meat and looked at Kin. You're not gonna eat yours. Oh, Kin stuttered out. The Mokusei chuckled before putting his hand on the ground and making a wooden fork and knife appear. Here, he said after he took a smaller bite, sorry about my manners. Been a while since I had a dinner guest. Kin blushed and picked the utensils up and cutting into her own bit of meat. She took a small piece and put it in her mouth, chewing it slowly before a smile crossed her features. She cut another piece out before stuffing it into her mouth as well, making Naruto laugh. It's so good, Kin said after swallowing her 2 bites. All I need is a drink. A vine grew down in front of her with some berries on its end as a wooden goblet appeared on her left. The Mokusei's Markin stopped glowing and he plucked a few berries before crushing them in his grip. A juice appear. He popped the near hydrated fruit into his mouth and ate them with ease before grabbing another group of berries and doing the same for his own goblet. Wow, Kin said in amazement. So, you don't even have to go into the village for supplies, do you? Just to steal a few clothes, the blonde replied as he took a bite of meat. After he swallowed he continued, I might have to go back for a new shirt. This one's just about done. Maybe some pants too. Do you need anything? Kin blushed and smiled thankfully as she looked down at her food. And no, but thank you for offering, Mokusei-san. He studied her for a moment before putting his meat down and putting both hands on the ground. His markings glowed and he said, Wood release. Wood clone. Quote, a small willow tree sprouted from the ground before it twisted and reformed into a perfect duplicate of him. The blonde's markings ceased to glow after a good minute of the clone's existence and the clone melded back into the ground, vanishing from sight. What? Where did it go? Kin asked. Naruto grinned at her and took a drink of his fruit juice. He went to get my shopping done. The blonde said, I don't leave the forest, but my clones do. It's how I pulled a lot of pranks before. The Hokage sought a council with me and made me stop. He broke a part of his bargain though. Which is why he's going to be holding a council later. Oh, Kin said quietly. The Mokusei went back to a neutral look and picked his piece of meat up. He stood and went to the wall of Gaia before looking back at Kin. I'm going out. Don't worry about cleaning up when you're done. Just tell Ka-san you were and she'll take care of it. See ya. He then walked out of the tree, leaving the former Otokunoichi to herself once again. She sighed and hugged her legs close to her chest as she looked down at the food he made for her. God, I can't even thank him for dinner. Before he goes and does whatever it is he does, Kin thought before looking at the berry vine that was still in front of her. She hesitated before plucking a berry from it and taking a bite. Her eyes shot wide open and she looked down at her drink before picking it up and tasting it. As she let the cool delicious juice flow down her throat, her last thought was, my God, I would marry him if I could. Outside of the giant tiger den, Naruto dropped another body of a dead genin. He shook his head and started looking for anything good to take off him before his Biju sense went off. He leapt to the side just in time to avoid a Kaden jutsu that flew by his head. Kaden, what Biju used Kaden again? The blonde thought as he dove into the nearest tree. When he re-emerged, he scowled at the smell of burning oak. Goddamn, no good, son of a bitching shinobi. He roared to the sky. He darted his head around at the sound of a growl and saw a giant flaming cat. Oh, this is bad, Naruto muttered, leaping to the ground as it took a swipe at him. The giant cat growled and shot another fireball after him. Damn, Naruto cried as he dropped into a roll upon landing. He shot up into a back handspring to avoid the following fireballs. When the cat landed in front of him, Naruto finally got a few words of wisdom from his Ka-san. Thanks Ka-san, he shouted before slamming his hands on the ground. Try this on for size, pussy cat. Would relay he was hit with a fireball, sending him reeling back into the den of the giant tigers. The cat outside of the cave Relaya said a meek grin before powering down slightly to one tail, allowing a ponytailed blonde teenage girl to be visible. Beneath her blue chakra shroud, she was wearing a skin-tight purple short-sleeved shirt and dark shinobi pants taped at the middle of her calf to above her ankle, allowing her blue sandals to slip on easily. She had fingerless gloves and a Kumogakure Hetai ite around her head. The tea seemed easier than Karabi made it out to be, she mused with a smirk. Oh well, I was only supposed to get his attention, but I guess I killed him. You wish, a voice shouted from behind her. She turned around in shock to see the now shirtless blonde glaring daggers at her with his eyes glowing green along with his tattoos. Steam was rolling off his body, healing the burns her attack caused. He slammed his clenched fists into the ground and she watched with amazement as dirt started to cover over his fists. Earth release. Earth gloves. He shouted, tearing the huge arms from the ground. He slammed his fists together and snarled at her. You hurt me, that I can live with. But you hurt Ka-san and for that, I'm gonna kill you. Oh shit, the girl said, too exhausted to go back into her second-tailed form. She raised her hands to block the incoming fist, barely succeeding to do so. She was sent flying into a tree with enough force to actually break something in her back. She grew and in pain and looked up through her green and yellow eyes to see him running at her with another fist cocked back. RRRAAGGH. He roared as he neared. Before the fist impacted, she dropped her chakra shroud and closed her eyes, ready for the end to finally come. A strong gust of wind blowing past her face and the sound of something digging into the ground made her think she was already on the other side. She opened her eyes to see the large dirt fist inches away from her face. What? She whispered in shock. The dirt surrounding the fist broke apart slowly, revealing a slightly filthy clenched human fist. She looked past it to see the glowing green eyes of the blonde she was crushed by in one stroke fade into two blue orbs. He lowered his fist and stood in a tense fashion, before his tattoos stopped glowing and the other hand covered in topsoil became visible, the dirt that was on it falling to the ground quickly. He crossed his arms over his now healed chest and she could see he faint markings of a seal on his stomach. Oh my God, did we almost kill that drool-worthy male? A voice in the back of her head asked. Yugito groaned and held her head. She looked up to see the bee. Londa's tattooed face looking directly into her eyes, his cerulean blue eyes not revealing anything. After a flash of green, she only saw black. Naruto saw the Jinchuriki of the Nibi no Neko slump over, unconscious. He crossed his arms and scowled at her before sighing in defeat. Fine, he muttered, I won't like it, but I'll do it, only 'cause you said so, Ka-san. He crouched down next to the unconscious Kumo Kunoichi and put his hands underneath her knees and one on her back. Naruto stood with the slightly taller teen in his arms and checked her for any visible injuries. Seeing that she had none, save for a bruised spine, he decided he'd treat that when she was conscious. He walked back over to a tree that was intact and transported back to the area near Gaia. The Mokusei released to SM. All chuckle when he appeared next to Gaia as a thought went through his mind. At least now Kintsuchi will have someone to keep her company. So what do we do about the Mokusei then, Danzo-sama? Sai asked from within the headquarters of Root Anbu. He was kneeling before the crippled war hawk as he sat in his makeshift throne. Personally, he wanted to just leave the Mokusei alone, but he didn't and to even dare suggest that to his master. Not if he wanted to live anyway. Danzo hummed for a moment before speaking, we will wait to see what Hiruzen does before we make any move. I want more tabs held on him though. I want eyes within the forest of death at all times. Sai hesitated before nodding, a first for him because he knew the true power that the Mokusei held was much greater than his own. Or any other Root Anbu for that matter. He was reluctant to spy on the unknown legend, but it was Danzo-sama's will. And Danzo-sama's will was law. It will be done, Danzo-sama, the pale boy said as he bowed his head. Inwardly he thought, I will not be the one to do it, though. Naruto walked back into Gaia with the Jinchuriki in his arms. She hadn't moved once, but had muttered in her unconscious state about a Kurabi. Samui Aed the Nibi in her sleep. The fact she seemingly had complete control of her Biju's chakra amazed him, but he was humored by their relationship. It was much better, or worse depending on who you asked, than that of himself and his Biju. Kyuubi wasn't one to be exactly civil whenever they spoke, but she did understand the major disadvantage she had against him. Mokusei-san, you're back, Kin said in slight surprise before giving him a once-over and noticing the unconscious female in his arms. Who was that? What happened to your clothes? Are you all right? I am unharmed, Naruto said as he placed the girl in his arms on the couch Kin had been occupying. As for whom she is, I know nothing more than her being the Jinchuriki of the Nibi no Neko. My clothes were lost while I fought her. But it does not matter. My clone is on its way back with a new shirt and pants. Kin blinked as the Mokusei's markings glowed again and blanket of moss and vines appeared from the back of the couch, covering the unconscious Jinchuriki. She watched as he then went over to a wall and put his hand against it, making a new smaller couch appear against it. The same SS-like cushions on it as the one Kin had been using that was now being used by the Jinchuriki. Naruto looked back at Kin as his markings stopped glowing. This is for you, he said, gesturing to the couch. Do not disturb the Jinchuriki from her slumber. When she awakens, do not try to speak to her until I return. I must now resume my patrol. Goodbye, Kin. With that he left her once again. Kin Fr. owned at his constant leaving before looking back at the unconscious girl lying on what was once her bed. The girl was a pale blonde and had almost a feline tint to her facial features. Kin estimated her to be about 15 or 16 years old, and subconsciously crossed her arms over her chest when she saw her impressive bust. I wonder why she attacked Mokusei-kun, Kin thought before she widened her eyes and blushed. Oh God. I didn't just call him Mokusei-kun, did I? I believe we all know why I called this council meeting today, Sarutobi said from his seat at the council table. The council all nodded before Hiashi Hyuga spoke. I would like to say something before we discuss on what to do with this, Mokusei boy, he said in his ever so serious Hyuga tone. Earning a nod of approval from the Hokage, Hiashi continued. One of the branch members in my clan, Neji Hyuga, witnessed the 2 deaths of the Oto genin that assaulted Sasuke Uchiha and confirmed the boy did indeed do it. His exact words were, I have never seen such brutality from a boy my age. If I had to choose between disobeying an order from one of my superiors or face him in a life or death battle, I would choose defying a superior. The shinobi council were all whispering amongst themselves while the civilian that was injured by the Mokusei stood and growled angrily. So what? We let this monster take a hold of our council and Hokage by manipulating our fears. I say we send a squad of Anbu in and kill him. Hiashi narrowed his eyes. He is a Mokuton user, fool. Sending a squad of Anbu into those DS would be the equivalent of sending a genin up against Orochimaru. We need to remain on his good side. I do not doubt he would hesitate to suddenly allow Orochimaru to attack us should we provoke him. All the more reason to get him under our control. The Haruno civilian council member shrieked. We should bring him in and use him as a breeding stock for an army of Mokuton users. Would you do that to a child, Haruno? Sume Inuzuka growled. That would do nothing but make us like Orochimaru when he was doing his own experiments. How dare you say that? The Haruno shrieked. Kuromaru hopped up from his spot at his partner's side and growled along with her. Inuzuka Dono is correct, Homura said, shocking the rest of the council save Kaharu and Sarutobi, as is Hyuga Dono. Sending Song E1 to attack or attempt to capture him in his own world could spell trouble for us all. What we need is a diplomat between us and him. What? The civilians all shrieked. Danzo silently smirked and prepared to offer one of his own root agents when Kaharu spoke up. Homura-kun is correct, Kaharu said from her spot on the Hokage's left. I for one would like to keep this boy on our side. He has shown as he doesn't care who he hurts. As our fellow councilman can attune to that, and he has sealed off Sasuke Uchiha's and Kakashi Hataki's Sharingan eyes. We need to at least get him to Il Hataki if this upcoming attack is going to take place. I agree, Chozu Akamichi said with a nod. Hataki is one of our strongest, if not the strongest, Jonin in the village. We need him at his fullest power to counter this attack. Well, then get Jiraiya to unseal him and Sasuke-sama. The Haruno shrieked. The Hokage narrowed his eyes at her. Jiraiya won't be in the village for another week, Sarutobi said calmly. And I have personally examined this seal. It is one my master, Hashirama Senju, designed. No one but the one who created it can unseal it. How can we trust that opinion, Sarutobi? Danzo challenged. Perhaps if we have Jiraiya look at it. Who taught Jiraiya-san again, Danzo? Homura snapped, silencing all whispers of disbelief. Hokage-sama has looked it over, and if it was done by his master, he would be the one to know. We need to get back on track. What are we to do about the Oto shinobi in the Mokusei's care? He said he would only give her up if we give him something he wants, Shikaku muttered. What would he want that he couldn't get out in the forest? Money, a civilian suggested. Others nodded in agreement, believing it to be a wise suggestion. A greater greedier side of the council all scowled at the suggestion. The Hokage shook his head. No, I do not think that the Mokusei would have any need for money. I believe we should ask for a council with him and negotiate. We could always just try and take the girl from him, the Haruno suggested. Everyone gave him a look saying he was stupid, even Danzo. I'll admit that sounds tempting, Danzo said, earning everyone's attention again, but Sarutobi's advisor Homura and Hiashi had stated earlier that he would have the home field advantage. I second the Hokage's idea for a council with the Mokusei, Shikaku said. Several civilians muttered their agreement as did the Shinobi Council. Then it shall be done, Sarutobi said with a nod. He snapped his fingers and an Anbu appeared before them. What can I do for you? Hokage-sama, the Anbu wearing a Neko mask asked. Please escort Anko Mitarashi to us, Neko, he said in a kind tone, and if you could, have Hayate Gecko come as well. I believe we should consult him on this as well. The Anbu visibly stiffened at Hayate's name before bowing. As you wish, Hokage-sama. The Anbu vanished once again and the council took a small break from the Mokusei discussion to speak about what to do for the invasion. Several people, mainly Shinobi Council members, believed it would be best to recall all Konoha Shinobi from any mission they are on. The civilians concerned with money, or how they would obtain it, immediately challenged this suggestion with angry cries of negativity. Fortunately before a large argument could take place, Anko Mitarashi and Hayate Gecko entered with the Neko masked Anbu. They stood at ease when the Hokage smiled at them. Hokage-sama, they both said with a bow, councilmen and women. Relax, Kaharu said calmly with a neutral face. The reason we have called you both here is because we need the both of you to relay a message for us. Anko arched a brow and crossed her arms over her chest. Sure. Why aren't you just using a messenger hawk? Right to the point, Homura said, we need you to go into the forest of death and make contact with Mokusei. Anko's jaw dropped while Hayate smiled slightly, covering his small grin with a fist as he coughed. The Anbu stiffened once again and shifted in her place, showing her unease. Neko was unaware that the Mokusei, a boy her fiancé, Wu Kei often of and until her duty defending the council today, existed. She originally thought the Mokusei was a delusion of a newly developed symptom of his illness, and when he asked her if they could hold the ceremony in the woods for the Mokusei's sake, she thought he was joking about the arrival of the spirit. Why do we need to go bother him? Anko asked. She was slightly hesitant of going back into her favorite playground now that she knew the guardian residing in it knew what she did in it. That a boy barely 7 years younger than her, and a total stranger, knew that she actually read her friend Kurenai's romance novels. It unnerved her to say the least. We need to tell him about our offers, Hiyashi said, and though it surprised some of us, he required that only you, Anko, are the one he deemed necessary. The Hokage, though, asked for Hayate for an unknown reason. It is for a good reason, this I can promise, Sarutobi said, reassuring the Tokubetsu Jonin. The council all seemed unwary of his motives. But he was the Hokage and there was a reason for that. It will be done, Hokage-sama, Hayate said before a small coughing fit. They both bowed again before leaving the council chambers. As they made their way out, the Hokage and his advisors shared a collective smile, similar as they did when they were on Team Tobirama. Councilman Danzo narrowed his one eye slightly as he saw their smiles. It raised his suspicion and his weariness over the Mokusei situation. He would have to get his men in position fast, or else he would possibly lose a future asset to his village. The Kumogakur Kunoichi rubbed her head when she awoke. Her head ached and Nibi was still chastising her for attacking the quote, delicious piece of ass. We could have finally found a mate. But no, you had to go and set him on fire. Do you know how badly you ruined our chances? Besides, Kurabi only wanted you to get his attention and lure him back to Kumo for an alliance. The Nibi no Neko growled, planning on giving her container a headache to rival all headaches. Goddamn it, Nibi, shut up. The blonde Kunoichi thought as she closed her eyes and rubbed her throbbing head. She then realized she was laying on a very comfortable surface with a blanket wrapped around her. She looked down at herself to see the blanket was actually a specialized moss and dirt combo, same as the cushy ons on the wooden furniture she was lying on. Kurabi wasn't lying when he said he was a Mokuton user, the girl thought with a gulp. If he truly wanted to, he could have killed me. And as I've been saying, Nibi spoke up again, annoying her container, we could have had a mating with him, at least giving Kumo their own Mokuton user, but no. You had to go and prove yourself against this boy. I warned you. God damn it, Nibi, I said shut up. The girl roared from her spot as she held her head. Realizing she said it aloud, the girl slapped a hand over her mouth and turned a nice dark shade of pink. She looked around to see if there were any witnesses to her outburst. She was horrified to find that a black-haired girl sat across from her on a wooden and moss-cushioned couch with the visible effort to not burst out laughing on her face. Oh Kami, the girl whispered to herself, her face darkening. I said that out loud, didn't I? The girl nodded and bit down harder on her bottom lip. The blonde girl felt humiliated and tried to take her attention off the black-haired girl across from her by examining her whereabouts. It seemed to be a wooden cabin with no windows whatsoever and barely any decoration at all. There was a makeshift hammock behind her, but aside from that, the only other furniture in the vicinity were the couches she and the black-haired girl occupied. What is this place? The blonde asked her acquaintance. Receiving no response, the blonde looked over at the black-haired girl who looked as though she was having an inner quarrel with herself. Can you even talk? The blonde asked again. Earning a nod, the blonde was confused until a realization hit her. He told you not to talk to me, didn't he? Getting another nod, the blonde girl scoffed. Well, he isn't here now. So you don't have to worry about disobeying him. My name is Yugito Ni. As the black-haired girl refused to respond, Yugito huffed. Look, it's not like the house is going to tell him, is it? Receiving a nod, Yugito paled. So he was that gifted with his Mokuton, just as Kurabi said. Why couldn't she let her pride go for 1 second just to fulfill this mission? And now Nibi won't shut up. Things weren't going as she wanted them to ever since she arrived in this godforsaken forest. So you are awake, a teenage boy's voice said. Yugito turned to see the Mokusei looking at her with indifference. His attire was unscathed and he was holding a pair of black shinobi pants and a fishnet shirt in his hand as well as a towel on his shoulder. He looked from her to the girl and said, I'm leaving these here for boss. Want me to tell him anything for ya, Tsuchi? Yugito looked at who the boy was talking to, surprised to see it was her black-haired acquaintance. Tsuchi nodded and spoke, Hi Bunshin-san. I was wondering about a shower. The Bunshin nodded as he laid the clothes on the ground with the towel atop them. To Yugito's amazement, the apparent clone of the Mokus returned to a willow tree form before dispersing in a shower of green lighted dots. She looked over at Tsuchi, trying to see if she could recall the Hedai-ite from her memory. It was a musical note, and to her knowledge, it was a forged Hedai-ite. Before she could comment on it, another carbon copy of the Mokusei, this one wearing only charred pants, walked into the room. His intricate markings ceased glowing green and Yugito looked him over, surprised to see the markings covering most of his body. Covering his very, very, very well-toned body, might I add. Nibi purred. Yugito growled quietly at him. Both for making her Biju act like a crushing school girl and for knocking her out without even attacking her, or so to her knowledge. Oh, be quiet, Neko-chan, the Mokusei said as he pressed his hand on the ground. Forming another clone from a willow tree, his markings continued to glow as the clone finished growing. The clone nodded and turned to Tsuchi, holding his hand out. Yugito noticed the fairly large blush on Tsuchi's face before the clone took her to the wall and they melded into it. The Mokusei grabbed his clothes from the floor and looked back at Yugito, whose mouth was agape from the way the clone vanished with her black-haired acquaintance. I'll be with you in a moment, the Mokusei said as he walked toward the wall. He vanished once again for a few seconds before returning. Fully dressed in the shinobi pants and fishnet shirt his bunshin had dropped off. Yugito had to admit, he pulled the look off nicely. He was drying his shoulder-length hair with a towel, and she was surprised it still held its gravity-defying looks. Okay, let's talk, the Mokusei said, walking over to the couch across from her and taking a seat. First off, why are you here? Yugito huffed and crossed her arms. No introductions. That's kind of rude. I already know your name is Yugito ni, the boy said with a deadpan expression, and that you house the Nibi no Neko within you. From your headband, I can assume you come from Kumogakure and know the Hachibi no Kyojin Jinchuriki Kurabi. Was he the reason you are here today? Yugito blinked before scowling. Damn him. I thought he'd be a slow moron considering he lives in the woods. From your expression not only did I hit the nail on the head, but I seemed to tick you off while doing so, the Mokusei said with an amused small smile. I meant no ill meaning. I'm just curious as to why you attacked me when even Kurabi in his eighth-tailed state couldn't take me on. Yugito paled before asking, how did you fight Kurabi at 8 tails? He's practically unstoppable in that form. Practically isn't the same as being unstoppable, the boy said. He made me go into my IF, you must know. Yugito did a double take. If he just said what she think he said. When realization struck her she stood and pointed defiantly at him. You're a Jinchuriki. The Mokusei laughed before smiling and holding his arms out with a shrug. Yes, I'm possibly the second youngest Jinchuriki to control my Biju's most powerful state, with you being the first. I know of a younger Jinchuriki, but he is slightly insane from his tenant. But, how did my village not hear of this? Yugito asked, speaking of the fight between him and Kurabi, or for that matter, Konoha. Where was this fight anyway? What happened? The Mokusei narrowed his eyes. Maybe if you tell me why you are here, I will tell you something of our fight. Fine, Yugito said with a glare, eager to get her answers. Kurabi wanted me to get you to go to Kumo for an alliance or something. Happy. Then why did you attack me? The Mokusei challenged. It's not often that I get attacked by a fully powered Jinchuriki in a tailed state. Suddenly taken aback, Yugito found herself at a loss for words. Well, you see. The boy gave her another amused smile before his eyes glazed over and he sighed. Pride, your pride got the best of you, didn't it? Yugito blushed and looked down, embarrassed that she had been found out. Naruto couldn't help but chuckle when the image of a kitten from a childhood book he had read entered his mind as he looked at her. He LD practically see her ears go back behind her head in embarrassment and he smiled again before speaking. Well, it's understandable I guess. Not better than the Uchiha, mind you, but still understandable nonetheless. Yugito glared at him for his response and said, okay, you got your answer, but what about me? I want my answer now. Fair enough, the Mokusei said. Our battle took place in the Arashi no Tani of Kaminari no Kuni. I lasted on my own power until Kurabi made it to his sixth tail. She crossed her arms over her chest and sat back, pouting slightly like a child who was denied the toy they wanted. Yugito narrowed her eyes and said, that's all I'm getting out of you, isn't it? Pretty much, yeah, the boy said with his amused smile. The Nibi Jinchuriki huffed, severely disappointed before a silence ensued as she tried to think of something else to ask him. Okay fine, Yugito said, what about Tsuchi? Why is she here? Kin Tsuchi is merely a guest until the Konohagakure Su. NCIL and I come to an understanding about her fate, the Mokusei said, becoming serious once again, same as you. I will allow you both to leave when I believe it is right for you to. Who are you to decide when we leave? Yugito growled. The Mokusei growled back at her. This is my forest, last I checked, he snarled, making her flinch but still hold her ground, and nobody but Ka-san tells me what to do. You should be thankful to her, she's the one that saved you from my wrath. Yugito blinked before resuming her glare. Okay, so where's this, Ka-san, of yours? The boy's hard stare softened, as he took a calming breath and his markings glowed, causing the Nibi to purr in approval while the Jinchuriki herself fought back a small blush from the now noticeable definition of the boy before her. The couch he was on slowly shrank back into the ground and he altered his sitting position so he was sitting lotus style with a calm expression on his face. He opened his eyes, revealing a soft pair of blue irises with green along the edge and around the pupil. In a more mature voice he spoke to her, Ka-san is everywhere. She surrounds us with her care and protection, hiding us from those that wish those in her care harm. Yugito blinked and before her eyes, the blonde boy's markings ceased to exist, his eyes shut, and his body floated above the ground. Needless to say, her eyes became the size of plates and her mouth unhinged completely. What? How? Are you levitating? The Nibi Jinchuriki asked, opening one eye, still the same color as before, the Mokusei replied in a calm tone. Yes, he said, it is a manner of meditation I use to achieve peace with nature, commune with my tenant, and overall raises my spiritual and intellectual level. I can tell that Kurabi also introduced it to you. You are welcome to join me. Yugito shook her head from her slightly odd face and replaced it with one of suspicion before sitting across from where the Mokusei meditated. She took in a calming breath of her own before sighing and closing her eyes, joining him in meditation. The only difference being the blonde boy was now hovering only 2 inches off the ground. How are we going to find him? Anko asked as she and Hayate stood before the entrance to the forest of death. She shifted uneasily from one foot to another as she looked at the trees that once brought ease to her mind and body. This was her home away from home before she had run into the rumored Mokusei that guarded the forests of Hai no Kuni. The meeting unnerved her slightly, but she wasn't afraid of the boy. More so she was afraid of the things he may know of her more hidden side. Would he take advantage of her secrets? He'll know when we're in there, Hayate said as he walked past the first gate, IGHTLY eager to go and meet with his friend again. The boy was very knowledgeable and a very good sparring partner. When he first returned to the forest, the boy was gruffer than their first meeting and looked to be more withdrawn. Through a small conversation, more so on Hayate's part than on the child's, he was able to open him back up slightly. It was through this small show of camaraderie that they developed a small sibling bond. When the Mokusei learned of the disease he was stricken with, the young blonde took it upon himself to look for a cure. Through the years they have come a long way, but they were close. The Mokusei was sure if he knew where Tsunade of the Sannin was and could talk to her, he could very well create a permanent cure for his, Ni-san's, ailment. Anko looked over at her fellow Tokuho and arched a brow before rushing up to his side. The purple-haired snake mistress kept her arched brow as she spoke to the swordsman with a wondering tone. So what's got you so eager to meet this guy, Hayate? I know you're the only one that had known the Mokusei existed, but you act as though you've had more than one conversation with him. Hayate chuckled before it turned into a small coughing fit before he replied, you could say that. We're pretty close to say the least. I don't know if he sees our relationship like I do, a lie, but to me, he's just a kid looking after his home. If the forest was a hidden village, he'd be the cage. If that's true, then why doesn't he come into the village and become a shinobi for it? Anko asked. I mean, he's certainly got the talent in sealing. You've talked to Kakashi, right? Poor guy, he seems so down without his Sharingan. Hayate coughed into his fist before he nodded and spoke again. Yeah, but he's told me he's also kind of relieved. It's allowed him to take a break from his own little, duty to his team, thing. I'm getting off track though. The reason Mokusei hasn't joined Konoha is simple, he hates shinobi. Anko nearly tripped on her own 2 feet before looking back at Hayate. He nodded at her shocked look before she started stuttering. What? Why? I mean, he saved most of the genin from Orochimaru, right? She said. It was one of the reasons that kept the Mokusei, who was also a skilled warrior that had defeated the spy, Kabuto, in Anko's head along with all the questions revolving around him. I think. Hayate started before taking a moment to get a few coughs out. Pardon me, I think that he was more interested in getting the threat of Orochimaru out of his forest, along with the fighting genin within it. You know, our sentries sent to retrieve the bodies of the deceased still haven't returned, but then again, I doubt that Mokusei even let them go far from the tower. You were correct, Ni-san. A voice said from the 2 Tokubetsu Jonins left. The 2 shinobi turned to see the Mokusei and his marks stopped glowing. He smiled slightly before returning to his more serious self and saying, right, let's get to it then. Shall we? This is beyond beautiful, Kin said with awe as the wood clone transported her to a very well-hidden waterfall deep within the woods surrounding Konohagakure. The waterfall fell into a small lake that was crystal clear. The fish, frogs, and all around nature seemed to swim in complete bliss, almost in complete tranquility. Kin was awed by beauty she had been blessed with being shown and was eternally grateful to the Mokusei for this pleasure. Indeed it is, Mokusei's clone said with a nod, the water will clear your skin of dead cell. Ls if you focus your chakra through your body. Boss thought ahead and got you a civilian Yakuta. Kin turned to look in shock to see a silk green Yakuta kimono about her size resting on a rock near the water. She looked back at the clone with wide eyes only to meet a slightly bored gaze. Boss told me to keep watch from Ka-san's arms, the clone said as he backed away to the tree. I'll be watching out for you without watching you. You have 10 minutes to cleanse yourself, and 10 minutes to redress. Kin nodded silently before the clone merged with the clone. The Oto Kunoichi then stripped, with a small blush on her face before getting into the bath. She was slightly aroused by knowing the clone was out there, watching her as she bathed. Well, not exactly watching her, more like keeping an eye out. But it was arousing knowing he was there to possibly sneak a peek. With a yearning sigh, Kin slipped into the water before concentrating her chakra as the Mokusei clone instructed, Yugi, to watch the blonde across from her as he stayed in meditation. His tattoos faintly glowed on and off as he hovered above the ground. She was amazed by his control and the immense amount of chakra that radiated off of him. Any idea of what biju he contains, Nibi? Yugito asked her Neko friend. A small purr came from the 2-tailed Neko before Yugito received a reply. Not a clue, kitten, Nibi mewled out. A grin easily pictured in Yugito's head from the cat's voice, but, I do know he has more than 5. Even now, he is using just less than 1 tail of the tail's equivalent of the Gobi, which is almost worth both of mine. Only one of the 4 stronger than dear old Gobi. But do you know which one? Yugito persisted. It can't be the Hachibi, because Kurabi is its container. But to defeat the container of the Hachibi at only 3 tails. A yowl of excitement emitted from the cat and Yugito winced. covering her ears in a reflexive manner. She glanced at the Mokusei to see him unresponsive to her movement. Feeling relief that he had not responded, Yugito then refocused her attention on her Biju. I know who he contains, Nibi purred in ecstasy. Yugito waited patiently before asking, and, come on, Nibi, the suspense is killing me. Hugh-chan, Nibi purred out in a lust-filled tone, well more lust-filled than usual. Yugito blinked in confusion before her eyes widened in realization. Hugh-chan was obviously a nickname for a Biju, and considering Nibi called Gobi-Go-kun and Hachibi Hachi-kun, there was only one who matched up for that nickname. And that one was now even more legendary because of its container. So if what Yugito was thinking was true, then he's the missing Konohagakure heir. Yugito shrieked out of her sudden epiphany. The Mokusei's eyes snapped open and he fell to the ground. The two looked at each other in shock before Mokusei's eyes widened before narrowing. What did you just say? He said quietly. Yugito flinched as he stared at her with ice-cold eyes. She knew his strength now. The Namikaze Uzumaki heir that had vanished 6 years ago was rumored to be the Jinchuriki of the Kyuubi no Kitsune. It would make sense that he could have beaten Irabi at full Biju mode while only in 3 tails if that were true. It was all clicking together for the Kumo Kunoichi. And he knew it. Yugito looked at the cold blue eyes of the Mokusei, the long T. Me missing heir to the esteemed seal masters of the Uzumaki clan and the heir to the most powerful shinobi that lived almost a decade and a half ago. The boy before her was indeed both Naruto Namikaze, Uzumaki and the Mokusei. The fact he had vanished by choice in the forest, the very forest Yugito herself was now a guest in, half a decade ago was for lack of a better word shocking. Yugito felt so many things towards the younger boy, the largest feelings being those of envy and anger. Envy for the fact he escaped the life of hatred most Jinchuriki live and anger for the same reason. Your name is Namikaze Uzumaki, isn't it? Yugito asked. The Mokusei's eyes filled with rage and he suddenly leapt at her, pinning her to the ground. His arm was pressed against her throat while his tattoos glowed dark green. His eyes were now slitted in an odd swirl of green, blue, and red. She felt her limbs get pinned down by tree roots, causing her eyes to widen. One of Yugito's worst fears was realized. She was under the whim of a strange man that could do anything he wanted to her, and she had a good inkling as to what he would do. Never mention either of those clan names to me in that way. Never! Quote. Mokusei growled. When Yugito nodded as well as she could in his trapping grip, the Mokusei's tattoos lost their glow and his eyes reverted to the solid blue with green lining the pupils and the irises she had seen before. The tree roots vanished and the blonde boy stood, looking down at her before holding his hand out. Slowly, Yugito took his hand and allowed him to help her up. The two held a gaze before Mokusei turned away and made his tattoos glow once again. A chair formed and he took the seat with earnest before rubbing his head. First Orochimaru destroys my forest, then I capture a weird Oto Kunoichi that's terrified of me, after that I kill one of Orochimaru Tem's ass slaves, and to top it off, now I have to worry about a loose cannon of a Jinchuriki in my forest. The Mokusei growled to himself, despite it being loud enough for Yugito to hear. Yugito sat on her couch across from the blonde. What's your name? She asked all of a sudden. The blonde looked up from his grumbling with an arched brow. I am Mokusei, he started before Yugito cut him off with a smirk. Not that name, she said rolling her eyes, your birth name. The one your parents gave to you, the one the Yondaime got. I may respect the Yondaime Hokage for his work before Kyuubi's attack, but I do not accept him as my father. The Mokusei snapped, harshly, silencing Yugito before he continued, or do I feel the same way about Kushina Uzumaki? She has never once cared for me as her son, but should she ever come seek me out, if she lives that is, then that is her decision and I will honor it. Until that rather unlikely scenario happens, neither of those, legendary shinobi, are my parents. Perhaps by blood, but that is it. Yugito was in awe of the rant the blonde gave her about his parents. Maybe he was affected by the Jinchuriki's curse, she thought with a sense of shame. The only one I can think of that isn't today would be Kurabi, but then again, I never once asked about his past. As Yugito was buried in her own thoughts, Naruto was dwelling in his. His Ka-san was continuing to tell him about how harsh he was being towards his parents. She had told him over the years repetitively why how Minato Namikaze was doing his duty and being selfless towards his village, and Kushina Uzumaki was driven away by the village for attempting to reclaim the child she believed to be hers. Naruto turned a blind eye to that. However, nothing would heal the hurt Kushina had left on him when she didn't once attempt to come back for him. And Minato Namikaze could burn in hell for all the Mokusei cared. His true ancestor, the only one he considered to be a true member of, was that of Hashirama Senju. The Senju name would be restored if Naruto ever decided to return to civilization. If he could, he would track Tsunade Senju, his clan head, down once to give back life to the many children who had fallen after Hashirama died. The blonde already had the first names of his children in Min. D as he thought of them. Tobirama for the first son, to honor the lost brother of Hashirama, and for the first daughter, Naruto was unsure of what he would name her. Time would answer that question when it needed to be. Could you please tell me your name, though? Yugito's voice broke the blonde from his own thoughts. Mokusei looked up and saw the Jinchuriki looking at him with a purely curious face. Mokusei smiled slightly from his spot at the Neko Jinchuriki. You truly wish to know? He asked as he arched a brow. Hesitantly, the blonde Kumo Kunoichi nodded. Mokusei chuckled and shook his head before replying in a slightly embarrassed tone, my name is Naruto. Yugito blinked once, twice, and a third time before biting down on her lip to keep from laughing. The poor guy was named after a sliced stick of Kamabodo. She had never heard of anyone named that way. No wonder he's hell-bent on being Mokusei. Yugito thought as she fought back her laughter. As amusing as it is, kitten, Nibi said with slight mirth. Naruto can also translate to maelstrom, so be cautious. Names often say more about personalities than you think. It's stupid, right? The Mokusei said as he leaned back in his chair. This is why I go by Mokusei now. Not even Gigi calls me Naruto anymore. I think I might just drop the name altogether. Yugito's repressed laughter instantly died in her throat. She stared blankly at the blonde before her before suddenly she asked, are you Mokusei or Naruto, now? Instead of getting a confused look, the blonde Mokuton user sank back in his chair and closed his eyes. Before sleep claimed him, he said one last thing to Yugito. I wish I knew. We can speak freely here, the blonde said as he led Hayate and Anko into the woods. They were far past the boundaries for the Forest of Death. But only Anko seemed to care. Unknown to the two Tokubetsu Jonin, this Mokusei was only a wood clone that had been sent on patrol. Funny thing about wood clones, they are 10 times as advanced as shadow clones. Shadow clones can only report back to the shinobi once the clone disperses. Through this, shinobi regain the clone's memories and or any chakra skills they might have learned. Wood clones are far superior to their shadow counterparts. Not only can they do like shadow clones, but they can also speak with the shinobi that created them at any moment, so long as there are plenty of trees nearby. Turning back to the two Tokuho, the clone asked, what has the council decided? They would like to. Hayate was cut off by a small coughing fit, pardon me. The council would like to negotiate with you over the care of the Oto Kunoichi in your care. Boss accepts this, the clone said after a moment of silence as its eyes shut. It glanced over at Anko to say, her jaw trying to form a coherent sentence, and the clone smirked, bet you didn't think I was a clone, did you? I, as in Mokusei, have too much to worry about to actually meet with messengers. Ka saw, N needs protection now more than ever, and her children, my brethren, need me to guard as much as I can whenever possible. But what how? Do you know what will happen if you do this during a council negotiation in their office? Anko asked him. The clone scowled and Hayate took a step back behind Anko, something that didn't go unnoticed by the purple-haired INT expert. Why would I dare to do that? The clone snapped. If I was to go over to them, I would be a sitting duck. It would be just plain stupid to do that. If they wish my counsel, they do what I say, on my terms only. Got that? Anko merely nodded, as did Hayate. He had been the target of one of the Mokuseis, or rather his clones, rants before, and unfortunately for him it ended in a brawl. More like a beating on Hayate's part. He swore never to try and fight Mokusei if he had a bow staff ever again. Period. The clone smiled at the two's reactions and said, tell the council to meet me at entry 6 if they want a negotiation. Give Gigi my best, oh and please do tell Danzo Tem that if he wishes to send me some toys, tell him I don't like shinobi action figures. Even if they're life-sized. Before either Tokuho could ask what he meant, 3 bodies of Anbu with the root insignia on them fell from the treetops. Or maybe it was only one body. It was hard to tell what with all the pieces. Anko and Hayate stared down at the body. Despite both being seasoned warriors, the sight before them was gruesome. Very gruesome. With his work done, the clone's tattoos glowed brightly before he sank into the ground and the two Kujo exchanged a look before sealing the body as much as they could in a scroll and bolting back to the Hokage tower. Damn that Danzo, Sarutobi growled as he slammed his fist on his desk. He had been watching the Tokuho and Naruto through the crystal ball, but to see that the War Hawk had actually gone behind his back and risk a massacre before an invasion, to say Sarutobi was seething would be an understatement. Homura and Kaharu were also clutching the armrests of their chairs tightly. That fool, Kaharu hissed as her eyes narrowed down at the body the crystal ball showed. He could have ruined everything. All for his own little army, too. Kaharu, Hiruzen, quiet, Homura said as a chakra signature's presence suddenly came into his awareness. It was almost 24 meters away from them. But it was a very familiar signal to the Hokage advisor. A smile grew on the old man's face as he looked to his 2 friends and teammates, slightly confusing them. In an effort to explain himself, Homura said, "Our chosen delegate to the Mokusei has finally arrived. I will send an Anbu to fetch him. Please see that you do," Sarutobi said as he interlocked his hands and placed them over his mouth as he thought. What game are you playing at Danzo? What good could have come from such a death for your root Anbu? I need to tread carefully before the council takes place if you're up to something. Standing before an enraged council was no problem for Jiraiya of the Sannin. He was the esteemed Toad Sage, Seal Master, and self-entitled author extraordinaire. Quite a few titles for a man barely into of his 60s. But more than enough for one of the most powerful shinobi from Konohagakure. But what he was called for surprised him beyond belief. You want me to be your messenger boy with a myth? Jiraiya asked the council with an arched brow. Hiyashi Hyuga scowled. Jiraiya Dono, he said, granted, a better portion of us felt as you do today, but during the prelims of the exams, this Mokusei has revealed himself to be real. Jiraiya whistled and scratched the back of his head. Damn, so he's really a Mokuton user, Any idea of where he came from? Not a clue, Sarutobi lied to his student. But I need you to come with us to serve as a mediator for our council with him. I still say he should just go capture the boy, a civilian, the same one who had been injured, muttered, he is a threat to the village. But with the right persuasions. I highly suggest you don't say that to the Mokusei, Hayate said from behind Jiraiya before he coughed, pardon me. If you even try to threaten him, he will not hesitate to kill you. As a root Anbu can atone to. Danzo arched a brow as everyone looked at him before looking back at Hayate. Before anyone could question what the Tokuho meant, Hayate dropped a scroll onto the ground and released its contents. The civilians paled, a few had to excuse themselves so they could rid their stomachs' contents, while the clan heads all went green. But pushed their ill feelings aside. Danzo glared down at the body of one of his elite warriors and scowled, while the Hokage and his advisors glared at the corpse for different reasons. Well, while that is unfortunate, Danzo said after a moment, once he had recomposed himself, but what about the Mokusei's willingness to counsel with him? Hayate coughed into his enclosed fist, he agrees. Guan that you meet him outside of entry 6 of the Forest of Death. He also has a message to you, Danzo-san. He says, if you want to send me toys, I don't enjoy life-sized toy soldiers. Da. Enzo fumed visibly while most of the council all bit back their own laughter. Aside from the more bolder clan heads, such as Sume Inuzuka or Choza Akamichi, or the Hokage and his advisors, no one dare show their amusement from the Mokusei's legends. Even Jiraiya laughed at the look on the War Hawk's face. As the Toad Sannin wiped a tear from his eye and his laughter, he said, man, this Mokusei fellow sure seems like my type of guy. So, when do we leave? Immediately, Danzo barked. He stood and started to leave when a voice stopped him. Danzo, This is a matter for those of the Shinobi Council, Sarutobi said. Immediately, the civilian council burst into an uproar. They were silenced by the immense killing intent of the Hokage that leaked from him, and the clan heads backing him. Jiraiya grinned at his sensei, remembering a time when he feared the old man's wrath. Sarutobi, I care not if you try to stop me, Danzo said, electing a gasp from the civilians and even more killing intent from the Shinobi Council. Sume Inuzuka and her partner, Kuromaru, growled loudly at the root leader's words. Sensing his own mistake, Danzo recomposed himself once again before sitting and bowing his head. I apologize. Sarutobi blinked in surprise before standing and walking out of the room. The Shinobi Council followed and the Hokage's advisors, who are in charge whenever the Hokage is not present, formally disbanded the council meeting. Only Danzo remained in the room before summoning a Root Anbu hiding in the shadows. Follow them, he ordered. The Root Anbu nodded before vanishing into the dark. Who would have thought, after all these years, I'd be standing back in front of these gates? Shikaku said with a sigh, this is a pain in the ass. Choza and Inoichi laughed as the auras of their time in the forest re-emerged in their minds. The Yamanaka clan head patted his longtime friend on the back and said, relax buddy, we'll cover you this time around. I'd hope so, Shik. Aku replied with a grin as he scratched the back of his head. The three members of Ino Shikacho all led the smiling Hokage, Sannin and the Inuzuka, Hyuga, and Aburame clans respectively as they started to walk past the gates. Suddenly, tree roots shot from the ground and wrapped around their ankles. Kuromaru growled loudly before silencing when a louder growl came from the depths of the forest. He large Inuzuka hound whined and crouched down as his ears flattened to his head and tail tucked between his legs. Sume noticed this and started to sweat. She also noticed Jiraiya starting up a Kaden technique. Jiraiya no, she shouted. The Sannin stopped in his hand seals and looked back at the clan head. Sume sighed in relief that she caught him and looked at Shibi and asked, your bugs feel it too, Shibi Aburame nodded before replying, my hive is scared. Logic states not to attack these binds. This put all the clan heads and Jiraiya on edge. If an Inuzuka's dog and Aburame's hives are frightened by something, it is considered a good idea to avoid whatever they sense, or take great caution before attacking. Sarutobi was the only one to smile slightly and he turned his head to the left, looking at a large oak on the outskirts of the forest. We are here to negotiate, Mokusei-kun, the Hokage said as he slowly raised his hands and removed his hat. Please, release us and show us where to go. A moment passed as a wind blew softly before the roots started to weaken and eventually shrank back into the ground. Jiraiya was wide-eyed as he watched the roots vanish back into the ground. No way, it really is Mokuton. I've got to get word to Tsunade. As the roots vanished completely, a patch of moss started to form on the dirt in front of them. Sarutobi chuckled and followed the moss into the wood. The Shinobi Council members and Jiraiya were in awe as the dirt near the moss outlined the path they needed to follow before returning to normal once they walked over a section. Hiashi had activated his Byakugan before deactivating it immediately. The amount of chakra flowing through the forest had increased dramatically since his own time spent in there. I don't like this, Sume. Kuromaru muttered to his partner. Sume nodded her understanding and reached down to give her partner a reassuring scratch behind the ears. I know, pal, Sume whispered. This is illogical, Shibi suddenly said as a Kikai landed on his finger. The group all turned to him and were shocked to actually see his mouth as it was slightly agape. Despite the look on his face, Shibi continued. This female Kikai has markings I have never seen before. She seems to be unique. A teen's voice supplied from a few feet ahead of them. The council members, Kage, and Sannin all looked to see the blonde Mokusei lower himself to the ground with a large animal around his shoulder. They blinked and a few rubbed their eyes to see that it was an anaconda. Mokusei held his hand out and his markings pulsed, making the Kikai female fly from Shibi's finger and land on his palm. Indeed, Shibi said as his eyes narrowed, the Kikaichu should not respond to you in that way. If I were a normal Mokuton user, you would be right. Aburame, Mokusei said with a nod, but I am beyond all that. Hashirama-sama was the first of a mutation. I am the complete form and I have complete understanding of nature. I see, Shibi said as his brows started to unfurrow and he listed his logic. You dislike shinobi because they disrupt the natural order of the forest. Ninjutsu techniques such as Kaden burn things when they were not to be burned. Shinobi tools cause many innocent creatures to die before their time, and most shinobi have little understanding of the area they are in, even if they are native. The Mokusei smiled slightly. Exactly. I like him, Hokage Gigi. Sarutobi chuckled and nodded. I figured you would. This is why I only brought the Shinobi Council, especially after your unfavorable encounter with the root Anbu. Danzo got the message then, did he? Mokusei said with an amused smile before he noticed the tallest of the group. Who is he? He is no council member I know of. Jiraiya grinned. Ah, I'm not surprised you haven't heard of me. He bit into his thumb and performed a few hand seals before slamming his hand into the ground. After a large cloud of smoke, he reappeared atop a large toad. I am the great sage of MT. Myoboku, the strongest of the Sannin and most renowned ladies man of Konoha, the toad sage, Jiraiya. The Shinobi Council all sighed HEA. Vali and Sarutobi pinched his brow in annoyance. The Mokusei's eyes glazed over for a moment as he stared at the strange man perched atop a toad in an odd stance. After a moment his tattoos glowed and a group of wooden poles shot from the ground and into Jiraiya's jaw, sending him flying into the air. Everyone turned to look at the Mokusei only for him to shrug. Ka-san told me of his perverted ways. I don't like perverts, mainly cause I don't get em. Now, on to business. Ah, yes, Sarutobi said with a nod. Mokusei's markings glowed once again and a large table with 8 chairs on one side and a small stool on the other appeared. The chairs were well crafted and held clan symbols, or the kanji for oil in Jiraiya's case and the kanji for fire in Sarutobi's, on their backs. The clan heads were all amazed before taking a seat across from the Mokusei in their respective spots. Jiraiya landed in a heap on the ground and crawled over to his chair on his arms. Sarutobi took his spot and sighed before speaking. We asked for the girl to be placed in our custody so we can attain the knowledge of the incoming attack. I know this already, Naruto muttered. I told you, I want something in return. What would you have us do? Mokusei-san, Hiyashi asked. The blonde across from them gave him a look, as though looking for his hi. I'm stupid. Sign. Notha Mokusei crossed his arms over his chest. I want a written law forbidding those I see unfit from entering the forest of death, Naruto said. The council all became hushed and whispered amongst themselves before turning back to the blonde. Who would these people be? Sume asked. Naruto held his hand up and counted off his fingers. The Akamichi are not allowed near the lands because their offspring litter too much, the Mokusei said. The Inuzuka males are forbidden because they have no knowledge of how not to claim anything theirs. The Nara are allowed, although I doubt they will enter. Yamanaka can pick only certain flowers. I will list which they can take and when they can take them. The Hyuga are allowed to come because of their specialty in herbs making on the account that I get note upon what has been taken. The Aim are always welcome because they understand the logic of nature, and the Sarutobi will be welcome if they do something for me. Sarutobi, who was the head of his clan, arched a brow. What do you wish from my clan, Mokusei-kun? Mokusei grinned slightly. I want the summoning scroll for the monkey tribe. The Shinobi Council all gasped before looking at Sarutobi. The old Hokage sighed before nodding and looking back at the Mokusei. I will grant you this so long as you swear not to attack the village. If I am not pushed, I will not bother your village, Hokage Gigi, Naruto replied with a grin. But I believe you also wanted me to unseal that Uchiha's bastard eye, nay. Sarutobi sighed and rubbed his head as he thought, I have a feeling getting him to unseal Kakashi's eye will take much more than we think. In the clearing within the Forest of Death, the Shinobi Council and the Sandaime sat with racked nerves as they stared at the patient blonde. Sarutobi sighed as he looked at the tattooed blonde across from him. Mokusei-kun, what will it take for you to unseal Kakashi Hataki's eye? Naruto blinked in confusion before asking with a frown, his name isn't Uchiha. The council all slowly shook their heads in the negative and the Mokusei pinched the bridge of his nose, his head rolling back with a groan escaping his mouth. He hadn't realized that there were people other than Uchiha with the bastard eye. He messed up real good this time. He could hear Ka-san shouting at him to fix his mistake and apologize. In person, the Mokusei groaned and rubbed his temples while grumbling quietly. Damn it! How did I miss that? Who has that eye, but isn't a bastard? Please, Mokusei-san, Inoichi said in a slightly pleading voice, if Orochimaru is going to be attacking us, our village needs its top shinobi fully active. I will unseal Hataki's eyes, the Mokusei said slowly, and reluctantly, making the clan heads' eyes widen before he continued with a stern tone, on the condition that he comes to me. Gigi, I will hand the girl over to you on the condition that one of my bunshin will be present for her interrogation, which will also take place in the tower within my forest. I receive the monkey contract and the toad contract, the possibility to sign them, and that my law is written, signed, and active by noon tomorrow. The clan heads all looked at the Hokage, to see him with a small smile on his face. He nodded, making the other clan heads smile, and said, I can meet most of those requirements. You will have to talk to Enma. You're also gonna have to talk LK to Gamabunta, Jiraiya muttered with a hint of fear in his features. The Toad Sage hadn't been getting along with his summon in quite some time. Possibly due to the fact that Gamabunta was still raw. Jing over Jiraiya's failures as a godfather. Family is high in value to the Toads, after all, and he had been shirking that duty for a while. When can I do that? Naruto asked, leaning forward as he watched the old man with a slight gleam in his eye. The Hokage smiled secretly and the white-haired Sannin grinned. Sarutobi and Jiraiya bit their thumbs and performed a few hand seals before slamming their right hands on the nearest surface to them, both crying out, summoning jutsu. Quote, a cloud of white smoke the size of Hiruzen appeared on the table while a few meters away, for once Jiraiya had thought ahead. A cloud of smoke the size of a small mountain appeared. As the smoke cleared, a monkey the size of the Mokusei appeared on the table, around his head a Ite with the leaf symbol of Konoha on it and he wore modified shinobi attire of old, while where Jiraiya's smoke had appeared, now a large red toad with a pipe in his mouth and wearing an open black and white gi. Jiraiya, the toad bellowed, making the clan head swallow slightly in fear, why have you summoned me? I would also like to know why I have been summoned, Hiruzen, the monkey muttered as he turned to face the old cage. The white-haired Sannin hopped down from his perch atop Bunta's head and pointed at the tattooed blonde he landed next to accusingly, he made me do it. Gamabunta stared for a moment before bellowing out a laugh, his amusement being appreciated by the blonde in question. Enma arched a furry brow and looked at his old friend to see a smile on his face. Indeed, Sarutobi said, placing his pipe in his mouth and lighting it. Ignoring an annoyed glare he received from the blonde, Mokusei-kun here wished an opportunity to sign with the both of you. Oh, Enma asked as he turned to The proudly standing blonde that crossed his arms with a look of boredom on his face. Ha, I've heard stories from the Snake clan that work with the Mitarashi girl about this, Mokusei, Gamabunta laughed out. Bending over to come face to face with the blonde, now that I see him, however, I see no reason to be impressed. I feel the same way, Bunta-chan, Mokusei mocked, earning a scowl from the Toad Chief. Before his markings glowed green and a stump began growing beneath his feet and he began rising, making Gamabunta sit up in shock. When he stood directly across from the Toad Chief on a pillar of oak. The red toad swallowed and removed his pipe. Mokuton. Gamabunta gasped before narrowing his eyes, I see. A branch grew to the left of where Naruto stood and Enma climbed up to it. Resting on the branch with a grin on his face, I like this kid. What do you think, Bunta Dono? The Toad Chief mumbled, taking a few intakes of his pipe before replying, he has promise. Ah, what the hell? Besides, he can't be so bad if he got that idiot to summon me. He has to pass my test first, though. Hey, the Toad Sage cried in outrage, the sentence insulting him clicking together in his mind. I summon you, occasionally. Elsewhere, a bored platinum blonde Kumo Kunoichi fiddled with her braid. The Mokusei, Naruto, had left only moments ago with a small grumble concern. Intruders and a man he called Gigi. Yugito wasn't sure of what to think of the blonde Mokuton using Jinchuriki that was her captor. He was cold, detached, and angry at his village, while at the same time he was caring and gentle to the forest and the other girl in his care. It was just confusing to the teenage girl. He's perfect, isn't he, kitten? Her Biju asked, making Yugito frown at the Nekomata's tone. What do you mean, Nibby? Yugito asked her tenant with a frown. Nibby purred again, and a second later, Yugito found herself in her mindscape, staring up at the inflamed cat with a collar around her neck. A large bell with the kanji for seal on it. I mean for a mate, silly kitten, Nibby chuckled out. Yugito's cheeks heated up and she scowled at the two-tailed cat. I don't need a mate, Nibby. The young Jinchuriki exclaimed with narrowed eyes and red cheeks. I'm not you. I don't need a mate. I'm bound by duty to A-sama to serve Kumogakure no Sato. Bah, duty shmuti, ni. Bai said with a dismissive wave of her tail. Besides, you think he's cute, don't you? Stupid Nekomata, Yugito shouted, not denying the Biju's question. I'm going to be a jonin in a few years. I don't need to worry about a mate. I need to focus on my career. You mean, you don't need to worry about Yaj wants you to focus on your career, the Nekomata pointed out, her left tail pointing accusingly at the blonde girl. Yugito scowled and looked away, earning a tilted head from the cat demon as she continued, that's what you believe, isn't it? Since Kurabi-kun and Hachi-kun haven't found their mate, then there's no hope for you. Quote, shut up, Yugito muttered, crossing her arms and not looking at the Nekomata. But here we are, in the exact position you've been waiting for, Nibby continued smugly, a powerful boy. One that understands you and doesn't see you as just another piece of ass or as the other demon container comes into your life. Shut up, her head bowed as the cat continued. Let's not forget that he also hates his village, barely staying in it and holding no loyalty to it. Why, if you so wanted, you could claim him for yourself and take him home. I said shut up. Her shoulders were shaking. But you're afraid, aren't you? He'll reject you, just like the other boys would if you asked. He'll hate you, fear you. Perhaps he'll try to seal me away for good, like the village tried to do. Stop. Yugito's voice was no louder than a whisper. So you push the thoughts away, believing you are not meant for happiness. How sad, kitten. If I were an author, I'd publish this story, twist it though so you'd die honorably. But the way you're going at it, by trying to rise up in the ranks and earn their respect, the damn council will have you dead before then. Please stop, Yugito asked as tears escaped her eyes and she hugged herself tighter. And now that I think about it, no, you wouldn't expect your life to be like that, would you? Nibby ignored Yugito's quiet pleas. The blue cat crouched down and spoke quietly into Yugito's ear, but you think it's unfair they hate you while they adore B. Poor Yugito-chan. This may be your one chance at happiness, why take it from yourself? The Nekomata ended their conversation and Yugito was woken up by a light shaking on her right shoulder. Standing over her was an impassive Mokusei with the raven-haired girl named Kin kneeling next to her. Concern in her eyes, the Mokusei had his arms crossed over his chest and was standing over her on the left, his eyes staring intently at her left shoulder. Before he made a small grunt and sunk into the ground, vanishing without a word. Are you okay, Yugito-san? Kin asked with a small amount of concern in her voice. Yugito blinked and sat up, nodding slowly. Kin frowned and asked, then why are you crying? The Kumogakure Chunin blinked again and reached up to touch her left cheek, noting the damp feeling of it, before blushing heavily in embarrassment. As she turned away and began furiously trying to wipe the residue away. Kin frowned and gave the girl her respective privacy and asked no more on the matter, choosing to move to her designated bedside and sat down. Before she could speak to Yugito once again, the ground shook and the two girls found themselves thrown to the floor. What was that? Yugito asked with wide eyes. A quake. A battle. Mokusei appeared again from the floor. His face impassive and his arms crossed as he spoke. It was neither, Yugito. Kin, please help Yugito get to her bed. She is emotionally exhausted. Who are you to say? Yugito tried to demand an answer when she stood and then nearly fell as her head throbbed in pain. She was steadied by the raven-haired girl wearing a green yakuta standing with her and a wooden chair appeared behind her, allowing her to be seated on the moss-like cushion. Bindings suddenly wrapped loosely around her arms and legs, making her glare up at the emotionless blonde. Your Biju has worked your mind more than you'd like to admit, the Mokusei said. Boss wants you both safe and if I must, I will make sure you don't do anything rash. Yugito scowled at him and looked down, lightly moving her wrists as she sat. Before quietly requesting to go to bed, the Mokusei clone released her and helped her lie down while adapting the tree to not react to the aftershocks. The real Mokusei swore loudly as he stumbled backwards on the Toad Chief's head, remaining atop it with chakra. Why did I agree to this? He asked himself aloud as he tried to redirect Gamabunta from the trees. Oi! Don't jump on my forest. Would you rather I jump in the village? Was the sarcastic reply given to him. Naruto grunted as he walked back to the middle of Gamabunta's head. Honestly, yes I would, he shouted back with complete seriousness. Gamabunta stopped jumping instantly and looked up at the boy. Do you mean that you'd sacrifice the human village where children and women thrive? You'd kill them to save a forest? The chief asked. Naruto scowled and stomped roughly on the toad's head. Fuck no, I'd rather you didn't kill anyone or anything, if anything, crush the buildings. Stomp out the Hokage monument for all I care. The Mokusei exclaimed with anger, but I won't allow unnecessary deaths, be them beast or fauna. The toad remained silent before laughing loudly, his head tilting back as he did so. Wiping a tear from his eye, Gamabunta spoke, Kid, I ain't gonna lie. You're a fucking idiot. Thanks for the compliment, asshole, Naruto grumbled, his eyes closing as a vein throbbed on his head. But you're the most decent human I've ever met. Summon my clan whenever you feel you must. I'm sorry for the snigger fallen trees, the toad laughed again as he desummoned himself. Leaving Naruto in the air, the Mokuton using teen flailed momentarily before landing on the branch of a tree and merging with it. He walked out of another tree to come face to face with a patiently waiting Sandaime and Odd Clan heads. So how'd it go, Gaki? Jiraiya asked with a smirk. Get Bunta to bow to your wills. He and I came to an understanding, the blonde returned. Before smirking as he bit his thumb and went through several hand seals, slamming his hand on the ground and exclaiming, summoning technique, Tiger Clan, Kaiba. Quote, a large tiger nearly the size of a horse came into existence, making the clan heads all gape at the elegant animal while Sume and Kuromaru quietly whimpered. The orange-furred cat had blue stripes and bright yellow eyes, but the two large scrolls attached to either hip were what earned everyone's attention. The animal began looking around before landing its attention on the tattooed blonde before him. Sitting on its hind haunches, the tiger spoke with a deep regal voice, you called, Na Gomen, I mean, Mokusei-sama. Naruto smiled as the tiger corrected itself and he bowed before looking the animal in the eye and spoke, I have the toad. Next I shall be earning the monkey. Please inform Kai-sama and record this in your scrolls. As you wish, Shodai's successor. Kaiba bowed and dismissed himself before a chuckle earned the blonde's attention. Enma grinned mischievously and patted the boy on the shoulder. You surely are full of surprises, aren't you, Mokusei-kun? The Monkey King asked with a smile, getting a small smile in return. Before he offered a small scroll to the boy, this is our scroll. Sign it and return it to Hiruzen. Farewell, son of Gaia. To think, I actually get to use that title again. The Mokusei and the clan heads shared a confused glance before the blonde tattooed hermit faced them. His markings glowed brightly as the table before him sank back into the ground. The clan heads all stood and bowed, all of them receiving a bow from the blonde in return, before he walked to the Hokage with a small smile. Until next time, Hokage Gigi, Naruto said, holding his hand out. He was surprised the old man chuckled and embraced him in a hug, but welcomed the show of affection and returned it with a hug of his own. Breaking from the embrace with his surrogate grandson, Sarutobi stood and smiled, his hands resting behind his back. Until then, Mokusei-kun. The Shinobi Council and the Sandaime began leaving the forest, but before they left the clearing they were meeting the Forest of Death's self-proclaimed protector in. A form landed in front offing in a heap on the ground, bruises covering his face. Jiraiya of the Sannin groaned in pain. The gathered adults all looked back to CT. Mokusei glaring at the white-haired toad sage, the smallest amount of a blush seen on his reddened cheeks. Why is my student beaten to a pulp, Mokusei-kun? And how did you do it so quickly and quietly? Sarutobi inquired with an arched brow, wondering if the boy was skilled in stealth as well as Mokuton. Naruto looked to the right and crossed his arms, grumbling a reply, Jiraiya Baka is an arrow senin. He insinuated that Tsuchikin and I were doing intimate things with each other, Baka. Sarutobi laughed and walked across the prone Jiraiya's form, not at all caring that he stepped on the man's back and hand. The shinobi council followed suit, Inuzuka soon taking the advantage to step on the man's change purse and making him yell in pain. Naruto smirked at the prone man's form, shaking his head as he walked away before snapping his fingers as he remembered something. Turning around, the Mokusei shouted to the Hokage, "Tell Hataki-san to meet me tomorrow at the forest's Anbu entrance." Sarutobi nodded back, watching the blonde fade back into the brush with a sad smile. With a tired sigh, the old Sandame resumed his walk to the village, listening in on his council's conversation. The old man allowed a grin to come across his face as he lit his pipe, making sure he was out of the forest before doing so. "It's a damn shame he doesn't want to be a shinobi," Inoichi said with a sigh. Putting his hands in his pockets as he walked, little Ino needs a good love interest, someone other than Sasuke. Anyone other than Sasuke would be better, Shikaku muttered with an eye roll. That boy is such a pain in the ass. Not to mention he's mentally unstable, Inoichi said, scowling, he needs more therapy. Gee, ya think, Sume snorted, crossing her arms before grinning back at the forest as she walked. Wonder if the pup likes dogs. You just want him to get Hana-chan out of the house, don't you? Kuromaru asked, eyeing his partner with suspicion. The dog was ignored and he shook his head. If you fight again, I'm stealing that other steak. Sarutobi hummed as he listened to the two council members with daughters discuss their daughters' issues, and he smirked as an idea came to mind. With an apologetic look back to the forest, he thought, this may take more than a month to complete. If so, I may need to apologize early on. My duty is as a Hokage first, Naruto-kun. I'm your grandfather second. I hope you don't kill me. Naruto returned to Gaia to see a sleeping Yugito lying on her makeshift bed and Kin lying on his hammock. The blonde frowned and shook his head, moving to Kin's couch and falling onto it face first. His fall being cushioned by the moss-covered topsoil he made the couch's cushions out of. The tattooed blonde smiled as he felt a branch grow from the floor, and his body was covered with a maple tree's leaves, the large paper-like growths feeling absolutely natural to his skin. With a sigh, the Mokusei found himself drifting off to sleep. In his dreams, he encountered of his last living relative, and his actual mother. He dreamt that he and Jiraiya had left to find Tsunade and her apprentice, Shizune if he remembered correctly, to lead Konoha. His other dream had him seeming older, fighting against the Kyuubi no Kitsune alongside the Uzuoshigakure no Sato's last remaining child other than himself, Uzumaki Kushina. The oddest thing about the dreams though weren't who was in them, but what he was wearing. For some reason, he was wearing a bright, kill me, orange jumpsuit. Why, he had no clue, but he shuddered, both internally and externally, at the thought of being seen in such an unnatural color. Fallen village of Uzuoshigakure no Sato. In a small house just within the ruins of the Whirlpool village, a red-headed Wom and prayed to a small shrine before standing and walking out of the room she was into the adjacent room. The red-headed girl within it was sharpening a sword with a rock before she stopped her actions. When the woman knocked once on the doorway, the girl stopped her sharpening, adjusted her glasses, ran her hand through the right side of her hair and looked at the green-eyed woman with curiosity. We set out for Konoha at dawn. Karen-chan, the woman said, turning and leaving the room's doorway without another word. Her eyes were filled with hatred and sorrow when she said the village's abbreviated name. The girl in the room smiled, waiting until she heard the door to the house shutting before she released a small cry of joy. She went to the room the woman had prayed in before kneeling before. The image of a blond young man with his arms around the woman's shoulders. We're going to get him, Chunin, Karen whispered, interlocking her fingers as she spoke to the shrine. Watch over us and keep protecting Nisan. That's all I ask, Chunin. Please protect Naruto-kun. Outside of the house, Uzumaki Kushina looked up at the sky with a determined fire in her eyes. She looked down at the sword in her hands, the famed lightning blade of Senju Tobirama, and smirked. With this, I will be able to get my son, Kushina thought, clenching her hands around the handle and activating the blade. Council be damned. The end. I hope you enjoyed this episode. Remember to subscribe and like this video. See you in the next video.